Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us today. You know him from the show, but here I'm going to read his intro, right? Because we like to give people proper introduction. Guess what? He was a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in New York's 21st District. He's a contributor to the Huffington Post, which is, I'm sure that goes on the top of his resume. He was a commentator at the Young Turks, and he was an award-winning business reporter that I first got introduced to him over at MSNBC. And he's also a best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author. And he's an all-around sage. He's here for us right now. It's Dylan Ratigan. Hi, Dylan. How are you?
Incredible to be in the room with you. Nice to see you.
All right. Well, you were at our live show on Sunday, so you got a taste of that. That was fantastic. Now, first of all, my first question for you is how have you managed to look exactly the same for the last 10 years?
Because I was born with old face, and so I actually look like this. Like, you know that cartoon with the cigar and the kid, the baby, but he's got like the man face?
Yes,
I was buying beer without ID at 14.
Really?
Like, you know when you're in high school and you're like, oh, we got to find a buyer so we can get a 12-pack for this week? At least that's what we used to do in upstate New York. I was the buyer.
Oh, really?
No
Okay.
joke.
Yeah.
And then I was an intern at like Merrill Lynch when I was in college, if I'm 19 years old or something like that. But in the suit with the face and the I do this, do that, barking orders. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. It's
that's something.
basically any woman I've ever dated has always been dating an older man, even when I was younger than her.
So that's why I picked up on that right away. Like when I first
The
started.
old face.
So there's several people,
Or whatever the face is,
that
the
are
constant
similar,
face.
right? But then you hit us. But when you hit whatever age your face is, you then don't age anymore.
That's it. I've been 45
for the
since I was 5.
since you were 5.
And now I'll be 45 forever.
Yeah. So that's it. Because there's a guy, Larry Reeb, who's a comedian in Chicago. He was that way. And he's like, oh, I couldn't, because he's like, I couldn't wait to look older because my act was older. And I was like, you're right, because I always thought he was way older than he actually was.
Yeah.
Anyway, Todd Glass also, right? He was always, but anyway, so that's hilarious that you're aware of that you look exactly the same.
Yeah.
Now, so let me just, this was the first introduction I think maybe I had to you, or the one that sticks out in my mind the most. You used to come on MSNBC's Morning Joe, and you would actually start to tell what are obvious truths to us here on YouTube, but seems like, some kind of, crazy, out of this world pronouncements. And I'll give you an example. There was a big to-do on The View one day between Bill O'Reilly and Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar, because he said Muslims attacked us on 9/11, and that offended them so much they walked off the set. So they were talking about this for, it seemed, endlessly on Morning Joe. And then they asked you your opinion about this. Do you remember this?
Of course.
So here, this is, hopefully this is all set up. Here we go. Here we go. There you are, looking exactly the same. And here we go.
There is a small group of well-funded Wahhabi extremists funded by the Saudi Arabian government to whom we give money. I really guess, listen, you invite me on the show, so what's going to happen, okay?
So you start to tell a fact.
Just a simple fact about the history of the Middle East.
Just a jumping off point that Saudi Arabia.
What is the context of terrorism? Or not terrorism, but of Islamic extremist terrorism.
Yes. Yeah. So if we're going to talk about that, the jumping off point is, what is it? That Saudi Arabia funds Wahhabists, which is now ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Well, it's the doctrine upon which violence is based. It's like, it'd be the equivalent of whatever, any extremism in any religion.
Right.
The violent interpretation of the religion is Wahhabism.
Right. And WikiLeaks even revealed that they used to always say, well, these are just like these one-off Arab Saudi princes or these royal family that they're not in the government. They just have oil money and they're funding them. And then WikiLeaks revealed, no, it's the government that is directly funding these Wahhabi extremist terrorists, which we know as ISIS or Al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda.
But really, it's just another interpretation of religious fundamentalism, right? Which I can run through any religion. I can do it with Christianity. I can do it with whatever. So yeah.
So you're right. You can. And so you start to make this obvious point. Okay, if we're going to talk about this, let's all make sure we're dealing with the same set of facts. You introduced the most basic of facts, and they all started laughing.
Immediately.
Now, what does that say to you? Like the actual truth about the most important thing that we've been dealing with since 9/11 can't even be spoken on a news show. And when it does, it's treated as, well, first they laugh at you. So it's treated as a joke, the truth. And now you wonder why we're in 7 wars and nobody cares about it. And when Tulsi Gabbard says something about it, they call her a Russian. So let me throw it back to you.
We live in a world without context. I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't know. More than ever, there's a world with like literally zero context. And so, the only thing is, well, how do you feel about it? And so
Yes.
I'm so much of my journalism historically and even going forward, but historically was really about trying to help people have some context for what is the prelude to the financial crisis? What happened in the late 90s with Larry Summers and Bill Clinton, and how did they leverage the impeachment of Monica Lewinsky to get leverage over Bill Clinton to make sure that he played along to authorize all of the deregulation laws to get that? I mean, there's all these things sort of merged together. And so that was all I was really doing here was, for me, the Middle East is super duper simple. I know that sounds preposterous, not simple to resolve, but to understand the problem, which is really just, you have the North and you have the Arabs and the Persians. I mean, I strip the map, right? You have Iran in the North and the Shia and the Persians, call them whatever you want, but it's one sort of Northerners and Southerners, and then the Arabs, And so this is just a never-ending perpetuation of that battle, if you will, between those two larger communities. And at the and it's like, once you understand that, where it's sort of East LA versus West LA, it's sort of South side of Chicago versus like it's not that complex. It's just made complex through the way that it's covered, and sometimes
Yes, exactly right.
And so
They make it sound complex. It's not complex. Everywhere you go, it's Sunni Shia. Everywhere you go, it's Sunni Shia. Yemen, Sunni Shia, right?
Everywhere.
Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Sunni Shia. Syria, Sunni Shia.
100% of the problem, not the problems, 100% of the dynamics are driven by that split, but then it gets internalized into.
But then also you add oil and fossil fuels into the mix.
Which just creates a motivation for global powers to be there doing and then add the profitability of the weapons industry.
And so...
Of killing people, basically.
And so when you let me just play this again, because this is I think this
Can I just say one more thing before again, I looked at it, and I still look at it, but I looked at it as a privilege to have use of that really big legacy American oxygen that is MSNBC or these big networks, and so. Because my prior history is not as a broadcast, like my prior history is running corporate finance at Bloomberg and building that news, like I said, from a different angle. I'm a different type of a human in that sense, but I was a participant, one of them, right? Whatever they are, and so while I was in there, I was like, at the very least, while I'm here, I might as well make an effort to explain the truth, so that maybe we can marginally recontextualialize the frustrating, I'll tell you.
But it didn't.
I even wrote a book. I was like, maybe if I write a book, then they'll get it. Like, maybe because I'm just saying it, they're not getting it. And anyway.
I mean, I think the reason why I have such an affinity for you, or I'm drawn to you as a broadcaster and a person, is because I think I have the similar experience, right? I just thought, well, if I show them. I had the similar experience with Russiagate, and now it's with Trump. Well, if I show them what gave us Trump, they'll all wake up to it, and they'll all realize, so if we get rid of Trump, we still have the same problem? You mean Barack Obama wasn't a good alternative to Mitt Romney? In fact, he was just Mitt Romney? Yes.
Exactly.
So that's the problem. So I feel, and by the way, this message not welcomed. The message of Russiagate is just it's made up by the intelligence community to control a president who they see as rogue and an unfit steward of imperialism, and it certainly helps cover up the corruption inside the Democratic Party. They never have to do an autopsy. It gets clicks for the media. It's the perfect storm. And so I've been trying to explain that here at this show, me in my garage, a nightclub comedian.
It's a fine garage, I might add.
Thank you very much.
It's quite nice to be here.
Thank you.
This is a good-looking garage.
And so you had that similar experience where you would go on.
You and I are intellectual colleagues on some level, right? Like we are colleagues, even if we just met.
Right.
Like we're the filter through which we're consuming the world's information is obviously is at least in this context is similar.
Yes. And that similar experience of doing good work and having it not only not appreciated, but not even acknowledged. Like you
Punished.
You punished for it.
Oh yeah.
Admonished, called Russian. I've been called everything.
Sure.
And a petulant child to a Russian to a conspiracy theorist because I tell the truth, like you just told about what Saudi Arabia is doing in Syria. Of course, there's other things. Israel also. There's lots of
there's layers. It's a layered thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the main thing is that there's this natural gas pipeline that Qatar and Saudi Arabia want to send through Syria so they can sell natural gas to Europe. And why does Russia give a shit about Syria? Because Russia sells natural gas to Europe right now, and they don't want that pipeline. So that's why he's buddy-buddy. That's a big reason why he's buddy-buddies with Assad in Syria and why we are funding terrorists. Well, let's get to this. So let me play this, and then we'll get to it. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me play this one more time, because this is just awesome.
There is a small group of well-funded Wahhabi extremists funded by the Saudi Arabian government to whom we give money. I really guess, listen, you invite me on the show, it's what's going to happen, okay? So there's American oil money and American guns to the Saudi Arabian government. Those guns, that money to Wahhabi extremist Muslims in Saudi Arabia. The only ones who have ever killed us, them. We are not at war with Islam. We are not at war with Muslims. We are not at war with Afghanistan. We are not at war with Iraq, Iran. It's nonsense. So yes, they hold signs, I hate America. Have you seen the signs we hold? The only people that have ever funded a terrorist attack out of that part of the world on us, on your colleagues and your colleagues and your colleagues 10 years ago, 9 years ago, was this Wahhabi sect. And it is an extraordinary failure of our politicians and our media and anybody else who has an opportunity to communicate information to fail to make that distinction, because to fail to make that distinction is to risk a scale of conflict and a scale of disenfranchisement and alienation on this planet that may be convenient for TV ratings and votes, but is an abomination for the human beings who will populate this planet, and it's a lie.
So when Tulsi introduces a bill called Stop Funding Terrorism Now, and she's currently serving in the military and a sitting congresswoman on the Armed Services Committee, and it doesn't get covered, and he goes on Morning Joe and says that, and it makes no blip, just keeps moving. Everyone just pretends he didn't say it, and everybody keeps moving on. In fact, right now, John Singleton, I forget who's going to now interrupt you or start talking, and he's going to start talking about it in a much more milder way. And again, you have to bring it back. So that's what's actually happening. And the reason why this is so important and relevant today is because what's happening in Syria, Trump withdraws our troops, then Erdogan wants to go in and wipe out the Kurds. But who actually is going in to wipe out the Kurds? It's the terrorists that we've been in bed with for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. That was the majority of the ones going in to wipe out the Kurds, was our allies there. By the way, so was Turkey. Turkey's in NATO. And then immediately, well, first of all, Russia wanted to bomb Idlib, right? Why do you want to? Because that's where Al-Qaeda is. That's who's trying to overthrow Assad. They never tell you this. It's Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, it's the Wahhabi terrorists that we're funding. Timber Sycamore, look that up. And so Russia wanted to bomb them in Idlib. Remember, all this was like, oh, you better not bomb. If you bomb Idlib, you're in trouble, Russia. Well, guess what? Trump ISIS leader Abu al-Baghdadi is dead. And where was he? He was in Idlib.
And he's a Wahhabi high priest, basically, functionally. Whether I'm sure he wouldn't call himself that, but he's a derivative of that school of thought.
Yes, of course.
The entire thing.
Of course. And so now it's obvious to someone like me that Turkey, who really controlled Idlib, said to Trump, if you pull out and let us get those Kurds, we'll give you al-Baghdadi. It didn't slip past me, didn't slip past Mark Ames. He says, don't expect Anglo-American media to ask why ISIS leader hiding out in Idlib, the al-Qaeda stronghold armed by NATO and protected by Western media think tank propagandists these past few years.
The layers of conflict are impossible to unwind. And so when you look at all these things, you really have to find yourself asking yourself what you are doing in your own life to absorb narratives that are not true.
Yes.
Right? Because my point on Morning Joe was we're facilitating a multi-billion person potential conflict with the war on Islam or with this whole thing,
right,
when really we're dealing with nothing. I mean, in terms of religious affiliations, you're dealing with an extremely small group of people who are leveraging this. And the primary recruiting mechanism into the terrorist network anyway, by the way, is not even religion. You're dealing with water scarcity, food scarcity. They've watched their brother, their mother have no job, sit crying in the kitchen. And eventually you're the younger brother and somebody rolls up and says, are you irritated with the way you've seen your mother and your brother and your father suffer? And well, guess whose fault it is? And then they create a story about who to blame. Typically in America, it's America's fault or whatever it may be. And if you want, you can do something about it. And if you do something about it, I'll also deal you in for some money and some food. And now you just got to take this AK and do a little wet work with me. And we're off to the races. And now all of a sudden it's global Islamic terror. But really it's resource-deprived, oppressed human jammed into the corner to the point where they're extremely vulnerable and ripe for recruitment into violence, period, which really I think is the fundamental problem on the earth, much more than anything that has to do with religion or political conflict, which I know that that's like I was listening when I listened to you talk about the imperative for Medicare for all or anything like that. You're observing the obvious truth, which is there's a floor of basic resources that must be maintained in order to have a stable functioning society. And when you pull that floor away, you open up the field for all sorts of violent and destructive forces to enter any society, whether it's the fears that drive the promotion of somebody like Trump or whatever it is.
People don't realize
it's logical.
You're explaining that when people become desperate, anything is possible and bad things can happen and people can go to a right-wing despot, which is happening all over the place. Even in Italy, I was just in Italy, and people, and they start from the back end of the problem. Like, oh, we have all these immigrants now coming into Europe and all. What are we going to do? It starts our bombing of Iraq, which displaced millions of people. Then we moved on to Libya, did the same goddamn thing. We're doing it from Tunisia to Egypt, and we're doing it everywhere.
Which then layers back into the need to control fossil fuels, which then layers back into the profitability of the military system.
And now, which
then layers into those systems' control over policy and government and budgets.
And so if you're allowed to say that on Morning Joe, which you were allowed.
Oh, yeah. I was allowed to say a lot of things.
Why does no one else say that? Why does no one else? By the way, I know the answer. The answer is that's not you. You weren't looking to get another job.
Well, I don't know.
But most people are. Right.
I've obviously we all wonder that question to a certain degree because everybody's got their own answer. I feel like there are very few people who actually even understand what you're talking about or what I'm talking about. So, there are obviously people who are aware and avoid it because who needs it and it's going to affect my career. But I actually think the larger population has no idea what we're even talking about.
That's of course, because people on the news don't tell them what we're talking about, Dylan.
But I'm saying the people on the news don't know what we're talking about. It's not. In other words, when you look at the number, if you did a survey of all the anchors and reporters at all the networks in America, and asked them to what is a Wahhabi, what is idea.
Well, in fact,
that's not a conspiracy of malice. That's a conspiracy of ignorance.
But that's so
same consequence.
So two things. To prove your point, we just showed a video where a CBS reporter asked Tulsi Gabbard, "What do you mean when you say regime change war?" She literally, that was a question, and Tulsi laughed at her face and so the second point is I was at this symposium, whatever, with a bunch of journalists, Emmy Award-winning people from NBC and CBS and the New York Times, and we're at this
high status.
And I got invited by mistake, and so I'm on this panel, and the guy says to me, and I'm like, you know, you all are pro-war. That's why you work at these places. And he's like, have you ever been in an editorial meeting? That's not how we think. That's not how we talk. I go, no, I've never been in one of those editorial meetings. And you know why? Because you've been groomed since you were in kindergarten to sit in that editorial meeting, and I've been weeded out.
Sure.
Because I don't think like you. You think like everyone else who gets hired at these news organizations. I think different, so I'm not hired at that news organization. Don't you? Did those people not read manufacturing consent?
Definitely not. They definitely did not read
Really?
manufacturing. Of course
so
not.
people who are in the media today and paid hundreds, millions of dollars never read manufacturing consent?
I mean, I'm not going to say every single one of them, but largely no. Remember, television, with some notable exceptions, and there are some, but television as a general platform attracts people that want to be on it.
Yes.
And
Mediocres
people that
like
want
me.
to be on television when the priority is to be good on television, to look good. Mm-hmm. That's what that means. To be pretty, to be handsome, to be funny, to be attractive.
Right.
At its most superficial level.
Yes.
When the bias is to be attractive, however that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the selection process for the most attractive people to be the face of that information is not prioritizing any sense of awareness. And so you have a lot of interns that come in, they're 22 years old, they have the access, and then some percentage of those interns end up as reporters on television, and some percentage of those reporters on television end up as anchors on television, and some of those people that end up as anchors on television find themselves with huge platforms on places like CBS asking Tulsi Gabbard, what does she mean when she says regime change? Because nothing about the entire progression of the career was predicated on any familiarity with anything in the economic system or at the root of the political or social system. The entire thing was predicated based on a skill addressing a camera, looking attractive, and in speaking in a way that is well enunciated with a good vocabulary. And so when it's the same thing with our politicians. We have a system for politicians that selects for the person who's the best at raising money and assassinating other people's character.
Right.
And so when you design a system that's filtering for the best character assassins who are the best at raising money, what you get is at the top of the system, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as icons right now are the best possible fundraising character assassins in the world. And as a result, they're at the top of the political system. Well, the people that are the best at navigating the sort of internecine or the sort of Game of Thrones style politics of television networks, while simultaneously being attractive, or certainly aspiring to be extremely attractive is even better. That allows for it, because the only thing you're getting paid for is whether people watch
or not. That's it.
And people watch it's television.
Right.
Right. That's not tele-listen.
Right.
Right. It's and so the image that you are consuming is the determinative variable as to holding on. I mean, listen, that's a whole other thing, but I'm not going to go down that rant. I'm not just going to go on a whole the human beings love of the fulfillment of an uncertain event, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Okay. So,
But just to tie this up, the reason you're so frustrated, the reason the people that watch your show are so frustrated, the reason most people in America are so frustrated is because the people that we perceive to be the information dealers are not information dealers.
That's right.
And but that's good for Jimmy Dore. Honestly, it's good for me. It's good for anybody who's in some alternative information provider for sure. Right. But the problem is that but they have most of the resources. In terms of anyway.
Yes.
You got it.
Yes. So so when people turn on the news, they see any news person on any news channel, they think what they're getting is what you were giving people on MSNBC.
Information.
They think they're getting the straight information. They don't realize what they're actually getting is the purest form of propaganda possible. That is, and it's all, they have a nice jib camera that moves around. It gives it movement.
Exciting.
It's perfect lighting. They all have a makeup person. Rachel Maddow wears fake eyelashes.
She should. I mean, what she looks like is the most important thing.
Yes, right. And so, and a gay person, I don't know if you know, they would never tell a lie about a foreign war intervention, or they would never smear a progressive.
especially if they're from Western
So
Massachusetts.
it's ironic, yes, especially. So it's ironic that Rachel Maddow is basically a beard for an evil corporation, and that's why Chris Hayes is there too. And because a nerd would never be immoral or lie to you at the behest of a military-industrial guy. And
but I would argue that neither of those two people, for instance, believe they're lying.
I would argue that. I would argue that.
You think that they know they're lying?
I've seen instances of it for sure. Well, Russiagate is one big.
You think they know they're lying? I actually think they believe it. You don't think they believe it?
First of all, do you know any? So this is what I tell people. As I say, do you know anybody who won any awards covering Russiagate? I do. There's only one person I know. His name is Aaron Mate, and he's a regular guest on this show. Yeah, so if you were interested in the facts, you would fucking maybe read one of his columns or watch one of his interviews on here. Those people never once brought on anybody on MSNBC, Dylan, that had a counter narrative that could inform their audience. Never once, ever. They stopped bringing on Glenn Greenwald.
They accepted it as de facto truth.
They stopped bringing on Glenn Greenwald in December 2016 and never bring on Aaron Mate or Bill Binney or me or Kyle Kalinske or anybody who has a counter narrative. That's how I know that they know they're lying. That's how I know Chris Hayes knows he's lying and Rachel knows she's lying, because if they knew they weren't lying, they would bring on a counter narrative. They never do it because they're propagandists. And I'm sure guys like Chris Hayes tell themselves lies like this. Well, if I wasn't here, someone worse would be here. So I'm trying to do that. At least I fight a little bit. He got to tell the truth for 3 minutes the other day.
I saw the headlines.
And everybody shit themselves. Like Chris Hayes was allowed to tell the truth for 3 minutes on MSNBC, and the world almost stopped. Like we're supposed to give him an award for that. He should be doing that for 50 minutes every fucking night. He's not. What he's doing most of the time is showing Trump's empty podium while he doesn't cover Bernie Sanders' speech. That's what he does most of the time. And then he wags his finger at Susan Sarandon instead of at his boss who fired Ed Schultz for fucking covering Bernie Sanders. That's who these people are. They are conscious liars. You are wrong about that.
Yeah, I disagree with you.
I know.
I disagree with you.
I know you're much too friendly to, because they were nice to you. It's weird that you had such a good experience over that. I don't challenge the veracity when you say that. Yeah. I'm sure you did. I just think it's weird that you're such a ball-busting truth teller that A, you ever got on that fucking network, B, they let you go, and that you left on your own volition. That is amazing.
It's unprecedented in cable news history. I mean, we used to even joke about it because the only way you leave a cable news show is usually with some sort of horrendous scandal, right? Like that's how that ends.
Like Bill O'Reilly.
Pick 'em. I mean, you go down the line. Mm-hmm. Like once you get on that wheel, you're either going to stay there, or if this thing goes down, it's going to go real ugly. A sex thing, or whatever, attack the president, whatever.
Yeah, you got locked doors in your office.
Whatever it is. And that's all anyway. And so, I guess because for me, they allowed me at least a lane in which to exist. Mm-hmm. And at least I could get recurring bookings on Morning Joe and say things that I believe were relevant to shift the context. And because I interacted with so many of those other people, I'm like, you guys actually believe what you're saying. And you're sitting here, you're like, there is no way they believe that. There's no one in their right mind could believe that. They're not idiots. And I'm like, are these people idiots? Like, how can you believe that? And especially like the Russia thing is such a classic example where if you don't accept that Russia is this global mastermind of hackery and manipulation,
which they are not,
then you have to accept that there's a motive to amplify this, which is driven by the Clinton, Debbie Wasserman Schultz corruption of the Democratic primary process, which then goes to the fundamental corruption of the American candidate selection process, period, not just Hillary Clinton's sort of mastery of how to manipulate it at its highest levels. And then it goes to the mythology of America as a democracy, which is all of that. Once I get to the point where I'm indicting the concept of the mythology of American democracy, I've now really skated outside of the zone of acceptability. And so I damn well better blame the Russians.
Yes. So
right? You got it. What
Chomsky taught us was that the liberal class there, and the liberal class are the people who are brought on these talking head shows.
Yeah.
And they set the parameters for the debate, and you can have robust debate inside these parameters.
Sure.
And so, for instance, the robust debate was how much did Russia influence our election? Then you can have a robust debate about that.
Sure.
And how much Trump colluded with the Russians. You can't have a debate out. You can't go, well, I think this is actually a hoax that was perpetrated by the intelligence community. You can't actually say, no, Trump was actually brought on because of the way the neoliberal class is led. You can't do that. It's only here.
Well, the most dangerous thing in America politically is really the center left. I mean, people think that it's the extreme right, but at least the right wing, you know what's coming.
Yes,
They're easy to see.
that's right.
Whereas,
But when
there's
Barack Obama goes to Flint, Michigan, and takes a sip of the water and hops back on Air Force One, and goes back and decimates a community. He didn't even give them health care. He could have given them all health care for just as a stroke of a pen, and he didn't do it. And those people would not go out and vote for Hillary Clinton, and then they say it's Russia and racism. It was the black working class in Milwaukee that wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton. It wasn't white racists. Anyway, this
we go on and on about it. No,
Yes.
listen. I would just pile on and say if the Democrats were able to accept the fact that they were financially corrupted by the Clintons, who took over basically the funding of the
Yes.
entire Democratic Party as a kingmaker across the entire ecosystem to force Hillary into the if the Democrats could accept that they put the most unpopular presidential candidate in history up for the presidency, and reflect on why would we put the most unpopular candidate in the history of presidential politics up, and not look at people like me when I say it and say, well, he's just saying that because she's a woman. Or again, I used to criticize Barack Obama and how he handled the financial crisis or in how he dealt with healthcare. But any criticism of somebody, he's black, I'm a racist.
right.
So the fact that I ran corporate finance at Bloomberg and have a 10-year history deep in the heart of the global financial system, literally, and I completely can understand and explain what is happening in that situation, that's irrelevant. I'm just saying that because I don't like black people.
That's right.
And it's an incredible weapon.
So that's what they call about
to
weapon-
defang criticism. I mean, it's incredibly effective.
So that's when people say, oh, they're weaponizing identity politics. That's what they mean.
There you go.
They're weaponizing identity politics. So they're using, well, you're criticizing Barack Obama. Let's not talk about the substance. You're a white guy. And I'm conscious of that. So you have to be, I've been told that, hey, you should go easier on black women in power because it doesn't look good. And I get that. That's actually helpful information to give to me because
Better for your enterprise.
yeah, I'm like, oh, you know what? Yeah, maybe I should find another way to have people exposed because it looks bad.
Yeah.
Are you not wearing shoes?
No,
No, you don't worry about stepping on glass?
I do. But not so much so that I'm willing to put footwear on.
Really? Even a flip-flop?
I will. A flip flop is the first threshold, and I will do that.
So, but
like right now, my flip flop. Right now, the situation is my flip flops broke. Like the thing snapped off.
Mm-hmm.
I've got sneakers at the house. I've got proper dress shoes at the house. So I could have worn either one. Would have been, I suppose, fashionably suitable to my ensemble for today. But the idea of having my feet encased in that manner is so horrifying to me that I was like, I'm only going to go. I had a meeting this morning in Santa Monica, but it was like at somebody else's house. It wasn't like, I'm not walking. I'm not covering a lot of ground. So get away.
I get you. You're going from the car
To the house. I had to walk up. I mean, it's not like I'm not going jogging on San Vicente and the island.
And it's not jarring to people at a meeting when you show up barefoot?
It is.
And is that part of get your edge? That's how you get your edge?
It's part of my. I don't care.
Okay.
Like the fact that you find it shocking that I don't have shoes on is your problem, not mine.
Okay. So you're not part Korean.
I'm not part Korean.
Because my friend, I have a Korean friend, Steve.
Won't wear shoes?
Doesn't wear shoes at his house.
Yeah.
You go to his house, nobody's wearing shoes.
Sure.
And I'm like, I can't do that. I love having
Well,
shoes
she
on.
was horrified. She was like, shoes are a source of pleasure for your wife.
Yes.
Like she's like, I'm excited to put on these
Me
shoes.
too.
I like
I support.
I need art support also.
But whatever it is, you look forward. You're like, oh, I'm excited to put these shoes on.
Yes.
Now my feet is, and like I've just have the opposite psychological relationship with footwear.
It's like you when you pull out.
I think we're recording.
Oh.
Do you want to pick up a microphone or something? Because we're
Feel free.
We're doing a show.
Yeah, it's okay.
Do you, if you
And
want
maybe it was all my years of wearing like all those sort of really intense work. Like I was, wore a lot of suits with a lot of work. Like I never worked like this or like this. I always worked in full suit, full tie, full shoe, Midtown Manhattan, every day, 5 days a week, and for 18 years, right? And so I didn't like that. My feet hurt a lot. I guess would be the simplest thing would be that those shoes, those nice dress shoes that look lovely with outfits, hurt your feet over time. Hurt my feet over time. Now I'm sure anyway. Doesn't matter. We don't have to get into my fucking.
No, I can't even as a kid. I always wore socks to bed.
Really?
I always wear socks. Well, I grew up in Chicago. It's cold, so when you get up, the floor is cold.
I mean, women will be fully horrified. Like, imagine trying to get into bed with a woman with you want to see the bottom of my feet?
No.
Exactly. Neither do they.
No. I bet it's not good.
No.
Do you scrub the bottom of your feet?
I do.
Yeah, you have to, right?
Yeah. If you want to have sex.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just you can forego sex and then you don't have to shower or do anything. It depends on the day.
Yeah, that's the whole reason.
That's the only reason.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, so I always wear a shoe. Plus, since I'm shorter, it's a long story, everybody. I used to be much taller, true story. And so now the shoes give me a little extra.
Little more.
Yeah, and I put a thing in to give me a little extra.
Okay.
So to get me back at least somewhere near my normal height.
Because you shrank.
Yeah, I shrank about 3 inches.
No kidding.
Yeah, and then I had an operation where they puff your spine up. It's called a kyphoplasty. They put a metal rod into your spine, and then they put air in there and try to make it go up. And
That's horrible.
It wasn't a good time.
No.
I woke up during that.
Really?
I had one of those things where you're awake but you can't yell.
Wow.
That was fucking unbelievable.
Wow.
That was unbelievable. Now I'm afraid of operations.
Well, the third leading cause of death?
Don't tell me. What is
Hospitals, doctors.
it? Yep.
Like cancer and heart disease are 1 and 2.
And then
or maybe it's heart disease,
and
cancer.
then medical malpractice?
Well, just doctors in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so that's I'm like, because heart disease is the easiest one to manage for. Like heart disease is a lifestyle death, right? If you don't eat certain things and you don't do certain things, you're not going to have a heart attack. It's like Woody Allen has a joke. He's like, listen, at least I know I'm not going to die on stage with a heart attack because I don't eat this or don't do that or whatever. So you can take that one off. Cancer's a little more squirrely, but still highly lifestyle driven.
I think.
And then if you just don't go to the doctor.
I think don't go to the doctor. Okay. I think that okay, let me get back to this. So tell me about Bloomberg. Can you tell me about that? So you get out of college. What was your degree?
Political economics and Japanese language. I lived in Japan when I was in university. Imagine I was like twice everybody else. I lived in Osaka.
Really?
With the Japanese family that didn't speak a word of English. I was like a pet gorilla.
Really? So
ate twice as much food, twice everybody's size. Very, very limited barbaric communication. Food now have you? Stuff like that.
And so but do you like sushi?
I love Japan in general. Sure. Yeah,
okay.
Sushi, sure.
Did you know that they found a place to put the all the radioactive water from Fukushima? Did you know what they found?
No.
Yeah, they're going to put it in the ocean. I was like, oh, thank God. I thought they weren't going to find a place to put it.
Well, the nice thing, too, when they put it there is because the currents run east, it goes offshore from them. It really more comes to us.
Yes, correct.
So it's convenient for them.
Yeah, they did. There was fish showing up. Anyway,
I remember watching the map of the radiation field from Fukushima and having all the people talk about the ill-advised nature of eating fish from the Pacific.
I know. So that's why I eat mostly.
It's got to be a decent amount of fish.
I eat mostly Scottish salmon when I go now.
Okay.
So that's the.
You really can't do anything. You know, I got bit by a tick and I can no longer eat meat.
You got what?
I got bit. Is that proper
bitten?
English?
You were bitten.
I was bitten by a Lone Star tick.
Wow, from Texas?
You would think, but no. Could be anywhere, but it's got a white dot on its back.
And so what happened?
So when the Lone Star tick bites you, it creates what's called an alpha-gal allergy. Alpha-gal is like some subcomponent of mammalian meat. And so once you have it, once the tick bites you and once you have this alpha-gal allergy, you can no longer eat mammalian. I can eat chicken and fish. And if you do eat mammalian meat, it's full like anaphylactic, EpiPen, like gonna die, can't breathe kind of stuff. It's not like, my stomach's upset.
How did you find out that happened, that you got bit by the tick?
I only reversed my way into it because it's also progressive over time. So my first time I had any reactions where I was just having hives on my backside and under my armpits and like back of my knees. And I didn't even know what it was. And then I started to notice that whenever I had a steak or a hamburger or whatever, that I would always get a little itchy about 3 hours later as the digestive process apparently progresses. I didn't realize this at the time. And then I was in New York maybe 6 or 7 months ago, and I had a triple stack burger from Shake Shack, which I quite enjoyed, and had a full like anaphylactic event, respiratory, the whole nine. And then went to the doctor, got the sort of lowdown on it. And then even more recently, I was in Spain last month and had a beautiful steak. Because you forget, like I've been eating steak and for my whole life. I like it. I enjoy it. I find it to be delightful. And so sometimes I'll completely forget, although actually after what happened last month, I will never forget again.
What,
But
you forgot that you were allergic to
I
meat?
forget the allergy. I'm with friends. I'm in Barcelona. We're all out. I'm like, yeah, steaks all around. Let's do this, you know? Not even thinking like, because it's like, and then all of a sudden I'm like,
What happened? You almost die?
I mean, almost died would be an extreme exaggeration, but my entire body is completely covered in hives. My respiratory system is closing up. I'm short of breath. I can't breathe. I don't know whether you never get to the almost die part, but when your respiratory system starts to close up, you don't really know when it's going to stop.
Right.
So that creates an emotional anxiety.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. So that creates an emotional.
It does.
I know it does. That's kind of an understatement.
But so yeah, no.
I think I'm dying. That's you're having an emotional.
He's having a little emotional experience there. So it'll pass. Just wait him out. Might not die.
He's having an anxiety episode.
But yeah, Alpha Gal, watch out for the Lone Star tick. You'll never have a cheeseburger again.
So where did you get bitten by that
Gotta be
tick?
probably Long Island. I spend a lot of time on
really?
Long Island in the summer. And we're sort of vigilant, obviously, about Lyme disease and the deer ticks.
Yeah, I know a guy who had that Lyme disease. It's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
It almost killed him.
And so like maybe the focus on the vigilance of treating everything for the deer tick to prevent Lyme allowed the Lone Star tick to sneak in there and do the red meat allergy.
How many people get the Lone Star tick bite a year? Do you
I
know?
have to Google it. I can't say. I don't think it's that many, but it seems to be increasing. The Lone Star tick is the same. Because of the climate issues and the temperature issues, it's very fertile. Like one of the things that'll happen increasingly as the climate continues to shift is obviously the fires in California or the Hurricane Dorian that we saw in the Bahamas, or whatever the event you want to pick that sort of is these high apex global news level, natural disasters. But one of the sort of lurking ones is going to be insect driven, which would be super exciting for some group of people.
When you say insect driven, do you
hordes of ticks, because there's going to be an imbalance in the overall ecosystem.
Because I think insects are dying out, right?
For sure, but there is some set of insects, deer ticks, for instance, which are thriving like they never have. Right, there's another side of the ledger, right? It's an invasive species. It's just like an invasive species. There's certain things that go away, and then there are certain things that go uninhibited.
I used to get ticks on me all the time. We used to go camping as kids, and we would just burn them off with cigarettes, whatever.
problem.
Nobody thought anything
No
about
big deal.
it.
That's why, and because I grew up in that context. Anyway, apparently it's different now.
Wow,
So no burgers.
that's too bad.
What a bummer, right?
Yeah. So my bone doctor told me I have to eat meat. He that's what he told me.
Okay.
Anyway, he told me this long story about how when we came out of the cave inside of the
I wish I know.
thing, and he's the best doctor endocrinologist in the world. So
Imagine if you had to eat meat but were bit by a Lone Star tick, and you'd be in quite the predicament.
I'd be in trouble. But you can eat like Beyond Meat, that kind of fake meat, right?
I could.
Have you had an Incredible Burger or Impossible Burger yet?
I can't say that I have.
They're amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it impossible to believe? That
It's
that's-
impossible to believe. Yeah.
I mean, I will, I suppose.
So tell me about the 10 years at Bloomberg.
I mean, it was
So you get out of college, you have your political, what is it called?
political science and economics, right? It was just those
Okay.
two things combined in one.
Wow.
And Japanese language.
So if you major in that and you have a conscience, that's a setup for a lot of internal
Pain and suffering.
A lot of
Pain
internal.
and suffering. Mm-hmm. But the thing that was most interesting to me, and that is what are the incentives? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but what are the incentives that are in place to finance the means of production in society?
What are the incentives?
Where do I make money in society with the control of means of production? And right now, the means of production are largely in the consumer markets and in the distraction markets. And consumption and distraction is a very low value proposition to humans, but it's a high economic value proposition to investors and providers. So, I mean, just that whole dynamic of where do the resources go was always really interesting to me. And so that's really what I took going into Bloomberg. And Bloomberg, to their credit, was really driven. The big thing that was really driven into me there was, who do you work for? Who's your employer? Is Bloomberg your employer? And they were really, they're like, you're really working for shareholders and investors, and not in the sort of nefarious sense of the modern interpretation of the left, which is that the whole thing is just a giant extraction, although the whole thing is a giant extraction. But it could also be a giant creation, and investors and shareholders wouldn't care either way. They just want to make money. It's that the political system has created a dynamic where the easiest way to make money is through extraction. So, of course, that's what you're going to do. But if I made extraction less accessible and profitable, then you can make a lot of money through creation. You're making some money right here through creation in your garage, right?
Yes, that's because we have zero marginal costs when it comes to distribution.
Right. That's right.
So,
But anyway, you want to know about Bloomberg?
how about that? Zero marginal cost. I have no idea what that really means. All I know is that when I send out a video, it doesn't cost me any money. And
Whether 10 people or 1 million people look at it.
that's right. So like, if 1 million people come to my website today, it doesn't cost me more money.
Right.
But if I had a business and 1 million people came into my business, I have to hire people. I'd have to turn on the
Parking.
lights. I'd have to get the whole deal. Costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So now this is like, this is talked about in the third industrial revolution.
Exactly. Anyway, working at Bloomberg was one of the greatest experiences of my life professionally. I loved it more. It was one of my, I had 1,000 wonderful
What did you build
jobs
there? What did you build?
I built their morning television product. I was able
Really?
to build their morning
You
television.
did that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was from 6 a.m. till 8 a.m. That was the first. So that was really fun. And I was exploiting old face, by the way. I was 27, but everybody thinks I'm 45. So I can be the lead anchor for that product, because you would never put a 28-year-old or whatever I was in that position.
So how did you go from college to 27 years old anchoring Bloomberg's television?
Bloomberg was one part good luck, one part hard work, one part, all those things. But Bloomberg happened to be at a moment where it was going from being a big data house to a higher growth financial information company. I happened to get there at the time that was happening. I happened to have a really strong aptitude for understanding the conversation that they're wanting and trying to have generally about financial data and creating value for shareholders, and was good at talking about it. And so the combination of all those things. So figure I started out as a junior reporter, 22 years old in New Jersey, and then very quickly came out of that and started covering capital markets, which is new issues, IPOs, all that sort of thing. Then covered the overall markets in general. Wrote the stock market column for them for I don't know, maybe a year. That was in all this. You had to write. And if there's one story that comes off of a financial wire, It's the stock market story. If the LA Times is going to run one story from Bloomberg, it's going to be U.S. stocks rose or fell today as the single, as in the thing, or whatever it is. And so writing that story, you learn a lot because you write the most important 800 words that they're going to write that day in terms of broader distribution, and you have to integrate all things, how do markets function, blah, 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 blah. And then the real biggie was I was asked to be the mergers and acquisitions reporter. I was 25 years old. I think I was making 35 or 40 grand a year as a reporter in Manhattan. And they were like, you've got to get to know every investment banker on Wall Street and get them to leak you information instead of the Wall Street Journal. And I was like, and they're like, you're going to have to work all the time. Da, 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 da. I want you in the gym with them. I want you on the plane with them. I want you at the beach with them. I want you wherever. And I was like, and they're like, your expense account is going to be $10,000 a month. And if you're not spending half of it, you're not doing your job. Like, you got to be with them out. We're going to give you a car and driver full time, all these things. I'm 25 years old. And they lay this on me and they're like, we'll give you the car and driver. We'll give you the, and I'm like, not going to cut it. They were alarmed. I'm like, I'm also going to need a place in Southampton, which they paid for.
No,
they rented. Okay. Yeah, no. So to this day in Bloomberg lore, it's one of the great negotiations of all time. I mean, it wasn't like they got me a place on the ocean on Meadow Lane or something, but they got me a place to stay out there so that I could spend. So anyway, I became very familiar with a lot of with that industry and I was good at breaking M&A. And
M&A?
Mergers and acquisitions.
Oh.
So when Exxon bought Mobil, the first person to report that Exxon was going to buy Mobil was me.
Really?
I mean, I could do this list of these things, right? And so then all of a sudden the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and these other are being forced to quote Bloomberg because they don't know whether Exxon, they're like, Bloomberg's reporting Exxon's going to buy Mobil.
Right.
Right?
And they don't know.
And now if I'm the person who's saying Exxon's going to buy Mobil, all of a sudden I'm a very popular television guest.
Right.
Because people want to talk about ExxonMobil. So that sort of the M&A thing really the mergers and acquisitions thing led to the broadcast opportunities, which I pursued because I never really I like reporting. I love learning and getting information and sort of and all that is wonderful and enjoyable. I didn't ever really enjoy writing. Like the nice thing about being the mergers and acquisitions reporter is I come back and say Exxon's going to buy Mobil. And you're the oil reporter, I'd say, I have no idea what the implications of Exxon buying Mobil are, and I'm not going to sit here and try and figure it out to write 1,000 words on it. I'm giving you your first paragraph in the nicest possible way, and you can write the rest of it. And I'm going to go out and find out what else is going on.
I got a driver waiting for me.
I got to go.
Take me back to the Southampton.
I got to go back to Southampton and see what else is happening.
There's a party.
Yeah. Girls.
Yeah, wow, that's a tough beat. That's a really tough beat.
It actually was a tough beat. I mean, you're every Sunday. I mean, it's a very intense.
It's like, oh shit, I got to get up tomorrow and drink again. Anyway, how many?
But so out of that,
how
sort
much
of
Vichy Soir can you consume?
That's the thing. How many private airplanes?
Right.
Anyway.
No, that's
no. So anyway, so I learned a lot in that, and then ultimately because Bloomberg was growing really quickly. There was a lot. There was always more. There was always more to do than there were people to do it.
Right.
And so if you were good at doing things that they needed to do, there was always more demand for you to do those things. And I just happened to, have some of the skills that were valuable in that regard. So ultimately, I think then that led to the TV thing, and then. The last thing was running corporate finance globally as their managing editor. I was the first person to ever, at one point, because Bloomberg was growing so fast, there was really, the management was always changing. And so finally they're like, we need to create these global groups and really become like a proper corporation. And so then I was able to, I figure I was 30 years old, but old face. And so all of a sudden I'm in a room with, there are 12 other managing editors who are all in their 50s running whatever. And so then, so ran corporate finance, managing editor for corporate finance over there for years, which then gives you a strong understanding of the reason I was so aggressive during the financial crisis to fast forward to 2009 is there probably were not a lot of other people that were television hosts at that time that had the depth of understanding that I had from the non-television career that I'd had at
Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg.
So, in speaking to that, Here's a video. Again, one of my favorite all-time videos. I tell the joke that the joke I like to tell is that Dylan Ratigan told the truth about the banking system on TV, and so now he has to do his news reports from a park. And I always point to this rant, even though, according to you, and we'll accept your word for it, that you did not get fired from MSNBC. You left at your own volition, and everyone was nice to you. But here's that rant. Here we go.
We owe $70 trillion.
Yeah?
I'll tell you, yeah. It's a
Okay,
funny
here we go.
I understand that, but you
to
can't sit
walk
here
out
and
a
say,
$4 trillion solution, which is basically just a way for the Democrats to avoid.
So this is, by the way, this is right when they were trying to fix the financial meltdown that had happened. And Barack Obama, famously, if you don't know, maybe it's not so famous, his entire cabinet was chosen. It was exposed that from an email from Citigroup. So that got exposed that everyone Citigroup wanted to have in his cabinet, son of a bitch, turned out to go in his cabinet. So it was no surprise to people who knew this information that Barack Obama actually was doing legislation to make the fat cats fatter and screw over people. And this is what you're screaming about here. Okay, here we go.
Dealing with this until 2017. I'm not here to talk about plans to deal with this till 2017. I'm saying we've got a real problem, and I'm tired of Republicans and Democrats who either want Republicans who want to burn the place to the ground, and Democrats, with all due respect, who want to offer a plan that gets it through their end of their second term of their presidency, and then screws me and my kids when it's over. And until we do that, we have to deal with the extraction that is at foot. It is the reason the financial markets are behaving the way they're behaving. That is a mathematical fact. This is not some opinion. This is a mathematical fact. Tens of trillions of dollars are being extracted from the United States of America. Democrats aren't doing it. Republicans are not doing it. An entire integrated system, financial system, trading system, taxing system that was created by both parties over a period of 2 decades is at work on our entire country right now. And we're sitting here arguing about whether we should do the $4 trillion plan that kicks the can down the road for the president for 2017 or burn the place to the ground, both of which are reckless, irresponsible, and stupid. And the fact of the matter is, until we actually, and I'm sorry to lose my temper, but I tell you.
What I like is a guy who apologizes for losing his temper and then actually ratchets it up one more notch. Watch this.
I've been coming on TV for 3 years doing this. And the fact of the matter is that there's a refusal on both the Democratic and the Republican side of the aisle to acknowledge the mathematical problem, which is that the United States of America is being extracted. It's being extracted through banking, it's being extracted through trade, and it's being extracted through taxation. And there's not a single politician that has stepped forward, Susan, to deal with this.
Okay, so explain what you mean there. What led to you to have that rant? So now
I was in the middle of writing the book, so I was in the middle of writing Greedy Bastards, which was forcing me to swim around in the really, really granular detail of each of the. With the way I structured that book was there's a chapter on trade policy, chapter on banking policy, chapter on healthcare, and so sort of in the granularity of each of those things, and the more further down I got into each thing, the more transparent it was to see the flow of money away from society and away from the services that are necessary and into the consolidation of the sort of super class, the global elite that is non-national. There is no country for the super rich. Their country is an airplane and airports and luxury hotels, and you move from country to country.
So when you say, I just want to, so people can understand, you're saying I was starting to investigate how it works, banking, corporate, and money was being drawn away from the people to the. So when you say that, you mean so it's being extracted, meaning banks
either
are,
in a linear, usually
so banks, what banks normally do is lend money to people who want to build something, and they create value. But that's not what was happening. What they were doing was doing these financial instruments that was actually not building anything, but just creating wealth that they would then extract from the system. Is that what you mean?
I mean, yes, but I can be more precise.
Go ahead.
What the banking system was changed to do in the Clinton era and then enhanced in the Bush era is very simple, which is, instead of doing what you just described, lending and investing in the creation of value, period, the entire system became one where the most profitable thing you could do is sell insurance on debt. And when the most profitable thing you can do is to sell insurance on debt, the only limit to your business is the amount of debt you can issue. So remember when cars were 0% for a long time?
Yes.
Why was that? Because I needed more car debt to sell insurance on. So if we're running an insurance, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so now I have this incentive to create as much debt as possible, housing debt, mortgages, ninja loans, that whole nonsense. And then the 0% on the cars, because the more debt I can create, the more bond insurance I can sell on that debt.
Is that a credit default swap?
That's what that is. Yeah. Very good, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Yeah, impressive. And then when that insurance is sold really cheaply, it creates that much more, and sort of everybody's reinforcing, right? So the car loan or the house loan is getting cheap insurance from the big credit markets, which means I can create as many house loans and car loans as possible. Everybody's buying the insurance because having the insurance means that I'm no longer going to have the risk of a default on those loans at the banking level. And the beautiful thing is when the defaults come in, when people can't pay those mortgages or don't pay the car payment or don't do whatever, they don't have to pay the claims. So all the premiums that were collected in the insurance sales are profit, and the liabilities are paid out through the Federal Reserve and the U.S. taxpayer. But the premium is collected there. So the consequence of that, and the reason it becomes an extraction, is because now the price of everything is wrong. Because there's so much debt that's driving housing pricing up, and that is pressing opportunity and available capital away from all the human beings and funneling it ultimately up into a few folks. That's one example of sort of a nonlinear extraction. I mean, there are very linear extractions that are more around loopholes in the tax code and things like this. I mean, there's layers of how this is done.
So the extraction part happens at one level because the way Bill Clinton, when he got rid of Glass-Steagall.
Actually, the commodity. This is different.
This
that
is
was a
different.
The repeal of
Then there
Glass-Steagall
was
was
the
a
Commodity
component.
and Future.
Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which you're probably familiar with, considering your
George
attention
Bush did that
to it.
one.
But again, when you look at the combination of all of those, so here's the biggie. One, and let's just back up, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Who's they?
Larry Summers,
okay.
Bob Rubin,
Right.
Bill Clinton, the party boys from the 90s that uncorked this whole firestorm of hell upon the earth. The idea, though, it's the era of the internet, early internet, shall we say, and they're like, we can use computers, now that there's sort of this infinite computing power, to take all of the trapped capital of the world, all the buildings, all the insurance policies, life insurance policies, this sort of thing, all the bank deposits. And we can use all the trapped capital of the world and using our ability to calculate forward default rates.
Now, you call it trapped capital, meaning that it's not liquid.
Yeah, like it's just in the house.
So we
or
have
it's just
something of value, but it's not liquid. But now we're going to figure out a way to make it liquid.
We're going to let that building exist, let that insurance policy exist, but I'm going to use computers to run a calculation on, so let's say I've got $1 billion building.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have $1 billion that I can put into the lending markets to make money with.
Right.
But if I use the $1 billion of that building as collateral for credit default swaps that I can then issue out, now I'm creating for society a benefit because all of a sudden the consumer market has all this additional cash to drive consumption because Larry Summers, who was at the time was the architect, believes that consumption is the number one most important thing a human being can do in this world.
Is consume.
Consume anything, right? And not produce anything, not create anything, not do anything, but just to become a consumer. That's the number one thing. And so that building then becomes a source of capital, credit, right, that can be issued for consumption by using the internet. One of the keys was Glass-Steagall, which allows that building or those bank deposits, in the case of Glass-Steagall, not a building, but bank deposits, to be used for risk capital against lending and speculation. But also, I needed to pass a law that says that the credit default swap, which is definitively and clearly and explicitly an insurance policy, is not insurance. And so exempting the credit default swap, which is one of Larry Summers' biggies, is critical moving forward because
exempting it from what?
That it's not insurance.
That from insurance regulation?
If something is insurance, each state has an insurance regulator that has capital requirements. If you want to sell car insurance, you want to sell health insurance, like there are rules. So I can't just go around I can't sell fire insurance in California, but have no money and just be like, just start sending money.
Right.
But
So when he got rid of them, considering credit default,
when the credit default swap was moved outside of the regulatory theater of insurance, where now it was like, no, these are sophisticated actors. This is an interbank market. We're not selling credit default swaps to Dylan and Jimmy. We're selling it to Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. It exists. That's the only place that market exists. These are sophisticated players. If Goldman Sachs is willing to buy it and Morgan Stanley is willing to sell it, they're smarter than the rest of us. They'll figure out what the collateral should be. Why should we leave it to a bureaucrat in Albany or Sacramento or and so that was a key moment to facilitate that entire undertaking. And once the credit default swap exists, now you have this wave of consumption because now you have all the consumer, you have all the cheap credit cards, all the cheap car loans, all the cheap housing loans. Just you have this wave of money flying out, and you have people like Jack Welch at General Electric at the time who are then manipulate. Because remember, General Electric has all these fixed assets. So who better to sell credit default swaps than General Electric?
And so that's why
how does General Electric each quarter make its number?
Selling more.
Dial up. You get about a week away. You know you want to beat by 2 cents. Open up the risk curve, dial it up a little bit, spin some out. Really? And then what really the chicken that came home to roost, obviously in 2008-9, and so the whole premise of this is we're so good at calculating the probable forward default rate over a curve, right? What percentage, 5% will default, 10% will default, whatever it is. We're so good at that we can now leverage every dollar at 100 to 1.
So when you say leverage, you mean we can
for every dollar the bank has, I can lend 100.
That's right. Okay.
And the only reason I can allow such a high level of lending against such a small amount of cash is because I'm so good at knowing who's going to pay it back.
But they weren't.
No, they weren't.
But they were.
And not only that, not only am I so good at figuring out who's going to pay it back, I also have insurance on it because I bought swaps on it.
Right. So.
But then when it got to AIG, who had sold all the swaps,
they couldn't cover
it. The government paid AIG 100 cents on the dollar, which then pushed through the entire system. Everybody got paid. Anyway, it's the biggest theft and cover-up in history. It's still not understood really to this day.
And so that's what drives me crazy when people give speeches and running for president or on television and act like Trump is the most corrupt thing that we've ever seen in this country. They say it. He's the most corrupt. I'm like, first of all, he's only been president for a few years. He hasn't had the opportunity to do the shit that Barack Obama did.
The sophistication of the theft and the largest theft and cover-up in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is a small-time mobster. Like he's a street corner mobster.
Compared to those guys.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to guys like Larry Summers.
Rubin, all those guys.
And Obama, ultimately.
Of course. No, Obama was the finisher. Because then if you indicted Barack Obama's solution, you're a racist.
Yeah, so doesn't that make you crazy? Because it makes me crazy. I consume the political television, like the debates, and it just turned into a who can dunk harder on Trump contest. And even when Bernie Sanders gets up there and says he's the most corrupt president, it's like, why are you saying that? He's not, obviously not. George Bush was way more corrupt than he was, manifestly. I mean, it's just transparently, he hasn't.
But even comparative corruption, the hyperbole around who's the most corrupt is a waste of our lives.
It's just a waste of our life. You're right. And by the way, but that's what they spend all their time on. Yeah. And that's what the mission of this show is, to remind people, you get rid of Trump, the conditions that caused Trump are still present. As Chris Hedges says, Trump is what gets vomited up from a failed democracy.
Yes.
So right now, what is happening all over across the country, which I saw as a stand-up comedian touring the country for the last 25 years, is that capitalism is hollowing out cities from coast to coast, right?
Sure.
And the first thing they do is build a bigger prison.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I mean, whether you're in Rockville, Illinois, or Anderson, Indiana, wherever it goes, that's what they do.
People own Corrections Corporation of America and their 401k.
Yes, it's amazing. So, and now what corporations are doing is actually buying up the infrastructure that supports capitalism and bankrupting it.
Mm-hmm.
So what Marx predicted is that capitalism will eat itself. It's literally happening right now.
Look at the streets of the world.
Yes.
I mean, granted, not so much in America at this moment, but people are. People get it.
So now, people like me who have looked at this a little closer,
sure,
than most people.
I would say a lot closer, but
not a lot closer than people like you, but
a lot closer than most humans.
Than most human beings. I'm starting to come to the conclusion that the problem actually is capitalism. And that, why do we let capitalists yank the rug out from beneath an entire community because they can make another nickel producing whatever they can produce in another country where people are more desperate? And that's exactly the system we have, right? So that's what happens in towns like Andersonville or in Rockford. It happens everywhere where a capitalist just decides I can make, or GM is doing it right now. So we bail out GM, and then GM says I can make another nickel by making this in Mexico. Fuck everybody here in Ohio. We're going, or Michigan, and that's that. Even though we bailed them out. And what Chomsky makes the point is that, when we bailed out GM, we could have told them, why did we give it back to the same people who just failed? Mm-hmm. Why didn't we say, hey, you know what? This is going to be a worker-owned thing now. And if you want to do something, the worker, just like they do in Spain for 100 years, that kind of worker owns the means of production actually works.
Sure.
So this idea that it doesn't work.
I mean, I would disagree with you insofar as, so there's, the word capitalism in and of itself is a problem, because capitalism, as I perceive it to be right now, is really just seen as get as much money as you can any way you can at all costs with no morals or no anything, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's how I feel like that's sort of how the current absorption of what is capitalism. But capitalism really is intended, I'm not saying functionally that that's incorrect, by the way. I think
in theory, on paper, it's...
On paper, capital is a resource. Your time is a resource. It's not just money. The community is capital.
Right.
Your time is capital. The money is capital. And the question is, well, how do people organize their capital, not just their money, but all their time and intellect, creativity, et cetera, to create value for other people in the community? And the argument is, well, the people in the community are better suited to do that than the central government, right? So that's where the propaganda in favor of capitalism is born, is out of that non-existent universe in which capital is perceived to be something that's more than just get as much money as possible, and then let the communities decide how to manage that. And so I have an issue with the word capitalism because, sure, does anybody want a system where basically a few people take everything and nobody else has anything?
Which is what we have now.
Which is what we have now. But that's also what communism is. That's all. In other words, it's because here's the thing. Those are all just words. The real issue is concentration of wealth and power in control of the means of production and the government.
Right.
But whether that is, I mean, the reason I have the biggest objection to someone like Bernie Sanders is not saying we should put more opportunity and more decision making into Pasadena or into parts of Texas, or give me all the power and I'll figure it out. And then you're like, oh, well, because Bernie Sanders is my kind of guy and I like Bernie Sanders' values, I'll be happy to give Bernie Sanders all the switches to all the systems and he'll figure it out. Or I don't like Bernie Sanders, but I'd rather see Donald Trump have all the power, et cetera. So I actually believe that the real battle of our time, and Matt Stoller just wrote a book about this. I don't know, are you familiar with Matt at all?
Yes.
So he did this book, Goliath, which I think he did, which is really about the return of the monopoly. So the end game of capitalism, the end game of the desire to get money at all costs, the easiest way to get money at all costs is to be the single provider. If I'm the only person who sells gasoline, you're going to buy my gasoline,
right?
As long as you drive a car. And so we've now sort of advanced to the point where we have all these monopolies, with Facebook and Google being the sort of poster children for the tech monopolies, and down the line, and that that's why you need to use antitrust law. So anyway, I would say that the issue is concentrated power more than it is capitalism. Although capitalism is because capitalism is such a loaded word. When I say your capitalism is not the same as my capitalism, and your communism is the same as mine.
So when I say capitalism is the problem, I don't mean
rapacious theft.
Yeah, I don't mean buying and selling or markets are a problem, because even where you have worker-owned means of production, they still sell what they make,
and there's still markets.
Yeah, and they still
make markets.
Yes, it's just the decision making is done by the people who actually are affected by the economy instead of one person.
Sure.
So
I just don't trust any. I guess what I would say is, if you're going to go magic wand, the number one thing is the incentive for the money, and the number one thing that dictates the incentive for the money is the tax code. And so if I have a situation where the tax code rewards long-term investment in the creation of jobs in America, or I have a situation where the tax code rewards the elimination of jobs and the concentration of wealth offshore, I can swap people all day.
Right.
But whoever I put in that chair is ultimately going to, it's the Truth and Reconciliation, the South African model, right? Where the system creates the villain. The villains are a function of the system, which the system produces villains because that's.
So we should have had one of those after the.
Exactly.
And we didn't have one.
And I mean, that was why it's so funny that you say that. I was like, because I was so intimate in the 90s through the Bloomberg work to the creation of the system that ultimately blew up in 2008 and 9. And through all those, I worked at CNBC all those years. I was willing to accept. I was like, okay, listen, you had this idea with the internet and computers to digitize and unleash trapped capital and all that. Let me give you the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't a nefarious intent. You thought it would create more money for more people to create more things. But your experiment just blew up atrociously in 2008. I'll give you that. But then you've got to say, okay, we just ran this experiment with these things and it was an unadulterated disaster. So now we need to re-rack and try a new angle on this that's not that. And instead of doing that, it was no problem, nothing to see here. Let's take care of healthcare, distraction. And then, by the way we're going to take care of healthcare is going to empower the employer-based private health insurance monopolies. Do you understand the amount of frustration and rage that I experienced in that particular moment? Because we're right going through the financial crisis. And it was there to be solved. It was all right in front of us.
And Barack Obama could have fixed it.
Barack Obama rolls straight up with the full control of the House. And they're like, the whole bank thing's been solved. We're going to take care of healthcare. So then I was like, okay. Who am I to set the priorities for a nation? They believe healthcare is more important than whatever's going on with the financial system. Who am I to judge? So let's see what you do with the healthcare system. And then they're like, oh yeah, we're going to maintain the employer-based private health insurance monopolies, but we're just going to force everybody to buy it. And then we're going to claim we increase coverage.
Yeah, that's
exactly enough to make you have an emotional experience.
It's exactly what Mitt Romney would have did.
Yeah.
In fact, that Barack Obama's plan was thought up by guys like Mitt Romney at the Heritage Foundation when Bill Clinton actually threatened universal health care. So their response was to come up with Obamacare. And then when Obama got elected, he's like, I'm just going to do Obamacare.
And then you run a mandate to purchase insurance from an unreformed monopoly, which then sets up the opportunity for the Republicans and Trump to come in and say, this is crazy. You can't force me to buy something,
right.
Which is true, by the way. That's a valid point, but it's a total distraction from the issue, which is your entire health insurance system is run by a private monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of dealing with the private monopoly health insurance system, which is 4 times more, bad outcomes, bad costs, like worst of all worlds, Barack Obama, you know the rest.
Yeah, so that's the thing. That's your frustration. You had it earlier than me. You had it in real time. I had it when Trump started approaching to say, don't you understand how we get at Trump? Don't you understand that Barack Obama actually isn't Santa Claus? And try to tell people that Barack Obama, instead of the Santa Claus, that Barack Obama is a Koch brother. And they won't believe you. They just won't believe
Literally.
you. Just like when you show them that Trump banned the Muslims at the airport. And they're all upset. Do you know why the Muslims are at the airport? Because Barack Obama bombed the shit out of them for 8 years straight. That's why they're at the airport.
He was the drone king.
No kidding. And so when Trump is putting immigrants in cages, Barack Obama built those goddamn cages. When Trump is gassing immigrants at the border, so did Barack Obama. And I guess they should be honored. They were gassed by the lesser of two evils. So my point is that if we don't know how we got here, which we do not.
For sure.
And the media will not let you tell us how we got here.
For sure.
We're never going to get out of here. And we're going to get a worse Trump. Because if some crazy idea that Joe Biden actually somehow wins the Democratic nomination.
Imagine the president that will come after Joe Biden.
Imagine that. Joe Biden, who is just as nefarious as Donald Trump, if not worse.
Sure.
Because you can see Trump coming. You cannot see Joe Biden. He hides behind identity politics. And he hides behind his friendship with Barack Obama. And he hides behind, I'm a regular guy who drives the bus. At the same time, he's 100% corrupt, always has been. And to the point where he made it harder for people to declare bankruptcy because of their medical bills. Because why? Because he was being paid off by the insurance companies. So that's the frustrating thing. Now, have you come to a point where, first of all, let me play this because this is what you wanted Barack Obama to do at the time. They
said, so what would you do about it?
So they say, what would you do about it? And this is what you said. And I've tried to figure out what you mean here, so let's play it.
What would you like him to do?
I would like him to go to the people of the United States of America and say, people of the United States of America, your Congress is bought. Your Congress is incapable of making legislation on health care, banking, trade, or taxes, because if they do it, they will lose their political funding and they won't do it. But I'm the president of the United States, and I won't have a country that is run by a bought Congress. So I'm not going to work with a bought Congress and try to be Mr. Big Guy. I'm working with the bought Congress. I'm going to abandon the bought Congress like Teddy Roosevelt did, and I'm going to go to the people of the United States and I'm going to say, you've got a bought Congress. And until we get rid of the bought Congress, which is Jimmy Williams' constant point, which is get the money out of politics, and until a president says that's the problem and says he's going to fix it, there is no policy that I can possibly see, no matter how brilliant your idea may be, or your idea, or my idea, or her idea, or your idea at home, is that idea will not happen as long as there's the capacity to basically fire a politician who disagrees with me by taking funding away from him. Is that a fair assessment?
So you wanted Barack Obama to do what was obvious, what he should have done, which was go to the people and say the problem.
Greatest speaker. I mean, he's one of the greatest speakers ever. Amazing.
And say, here's the problem. Everybody, your government is corrupt and bought. And
we got monopolies.
And we have monopolies, and I'm not going to deal with those people. And so, in fact, he had an army of activists behind him, which he didn't do. He disbanded them. And you said that he should have opened up his own bank and used 2% blending.
What did we do? How did we resolve the financial crisis?
We just put money into the banks.
But specifically, how do we do it? We said we will insure all the debt at the government level. So all the bond insurance is now backed by the government. So there's no, even if the insurance doesn't pay it now, it will. Mm-hmm. And we said that we would provide all that short-term cash to keep the thing running.
Right.
But who do we provide that insurance and that cash to? Only bank holding companies. A very, very, very small group.
Whereas you mean the big five?
Yeah.
So like community banks didn't fall under this. In fact, they got squeezed out.
No, they got destroyed by this.
Yes.
As opposed to what I was suggesting in that conversation, which I would stand by to this day, is if you're going to print money at the Federal Reserve and offer it at a low rate or no rate to a select group of financial institutions, and those financial institutions are really going to use it to gobble up all the real estate and basically consolidate all the wealth in America on a level that's unprecedented, that's very counterproductive long-term and seeds the ground for people like Donald Trump. On the other hand, if you open up the lending across the entirety of the community banking and small business spectrum, where everybody has access to 2% money, relative to some threshold of, there's got to be some point where you're like, listen, I'm not going to give you $1 million loan for your water balloon factory or whatever. But there's the selective benefit of that cheap money to a very specific group of people was one of the most destructive things that's ever happened to this country economically.
So
so he could have said, your Congress is bought. I have to stabilize. Like, you have a car accident, I need to get you on morphine and just like stabilize you, and then I'll start to work through whatever we're going to do with stitches and whatever.
Right.
Well, the morphine or the sort of the stabilizer after the financial crisis was unlimited cheap money from the government. So I know the financial system's gone full squirrel. I can deal with that. But first, I just need to smooth out the water.
Right.
The lending will do that.
Right.
And now we can get back in here and sort of work this thing out.
But that's not what happened.
That's the opposite of what they did.
Right. So they engineered a system that would just give money to the banks and make them whole. They didn't miss their...
And allowed the banks then to purchase all the distressed assets. Why do you think Steve Mnuchin went from being a regular rich Goldman Sachs guy with whatever 50 or 60 million bucks to a billionaire?
Why?
Because... So what happened during the financial crisis was, imagine every house in your neighborhood for 1 week is on sale for 90% off.
Yeah.
And now imagine you're the only person in your neighborhood who has any cash, and all the cash you're getting is from the government and it's unlimited. And now imagine you buy all the houses that are on your block at 90% off, and then after you've bought them all, the government then reinflates the value of all those houses back to 100%, except for you now own all of them.
So
Steve Mnuchin was in a position to buy bank debt in California specifically at pennies that was then reinflated to much bigger numbers, which then And that was not uncommon.
So this is why
you got to know the right people. You know?
So this is why. So this is why.
That's
okay.
good for Donald Trump stuff like that. People hear this stuff, they go nuts. They're like,
So I had a
send
joke.
in the madman. Sorry.
So two things. So I had a joke in my act where I would say, so when they bailed out the banks, why didn't they just give us the money, and then we'd put the money in our bank, and the bank gets the money anyway, but we get a double bang for our buck? I don't have a punchline for that. I really want to know. And then I find out that this was this was the intention. The intention was to bail out the banks, make them whole. Also, they would also get your house. They didn't want to bail out the homeowner and make them whole. They wanted to give those homes that were now distressed to bankers on the cheap. And which houses? Not the ones in bad neighborhoods, the ones in the best neighborhoods that they could now get at a fire sale at 90% off, which is what happened to our friend Graham. And then Dave Dayen wrote about it in The Intercept, but nobody else talks about this. This was
and who's
not
one of the biggest private landlords in the world now? Blackstone.
And Barack
How did
Obama
Blackstone get all those buildings?
Barack Obama bailed out Blackstone. The last thing he did on his way out of the office is he bailed out Blackstone, which is an equity firm. And so what is the effect of that, Jimmy? Well, it makes it harder for first-time homeowners to buy a house. That's what so who is he hurting? He's hurting the people who need the help the most, and he's helping the people who need it the least, who caused the problem. And that's what people don't understand, that Barack Obama...
That's why they wanted Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in 2016, because both Bernie and Donald Trump...
We're going to burn down the system.
We're like, this is bullshit.
Yes.
And they're both right.
Except one guy meant it, and that was Bernie, and Donald Trump didn't mean it.
Regardless, I don't dispute that at all, but I'm saying the appeal of those two politicians
the appeal of those guys
was derived from the betrayal of Barack Obama, who had built this hope bubble.
Yes.
And then this massive, massive betrayal already after the betrayal of George W. Bush, right? So you're coming out of George W. Bush and the trauma of the Iraq War and all the horrors of that experience. You get this sort of huge hope bubble, and then it's just a complete fundamental betrayal, which then seeds the ground for Trump and Bernie. And just as the Democrats now with the Russia hoax, and they run Hillary, they not only do they run Hillary Clinton, they orchestrate Hillary Clinton's ensured candidacy by basically pre-clearing the field of any competition was their primary mechanism. And then Bernie was the only person who was like, "I'll run. I will." You know what happened.
And so, yes. And so people are still there. People are where they were in 2015, 16, where they were in 2009. So that's what I tell people. I say, now everybody loves George Bush again, right? They forget what he did. And I have to remind them, people hated George Bush so much, they elected a black guy with a Muslim name. That's how desperate people were, and they wanted change. That's how much they wanted change. And Barack Obama did not. It was, as Cenk Uygur says, it was change on the outside, continuity on the inside.
But it's one of the great
hoaxes of all time,
but large-scale betrayals.
Yeah,
like and the thing is, human nature is so visceral and lizard-like in its response to betrayal, where it doesn't matter, right? I will burn the place to the ground. I would sooner burn the place to the ground than let you get away with the betrayal. And that emotion kicked in, and here we are.
And so it's again, people who consider themselves serious in the news business and in the talking head business, they'll never tell you why we got Donald Trump, and they all sit around pretending like Donald Trump is the problem. They're the most irresponsible, shallow group of people. That's why, journalism as a profession is somewhere beneath loan sharking. Journalism as a profession. Now, there are good journalists. None of them work in the establishment. Fucking none of them. Because if you tell the truth for a second, they will get rid of you. They got rid of Chris Hedges at the New York Times because he wouldn't stop telling the truth about the Iraq War. They got rid of Phil Donahue for the same reason, and Jesse Ventura never even got on the air for the same reason. They fired Ashley Banfield for the exact same reason.
I got rid of myself.
You got rid of yourself. You self-fired. You self-deported. And then they got rid of Ed Schultz for even covering a guy who was going to tell you about the banks. They fired him. And then they all act like Fox News is the bad guy because they fired Shep Smith for the president. This has been going on at MSNBC constantly. So I don't see an out. I don't see this getting better. So I've said this to you before when we first talked in August, that I think I'm a cynic, because the problems, the biggest problem is, and you talked about it in that clip, is that our government is completely captured by corporations, right? And guys like Chris Hedges know this, and guys like Chris Hayes know this, but he'll never really talk about it on air. He's not allowed. He has to have a podcast for that, which is hilarious. Why are you doing a podcast? You have a show, an hour, 5 hours a night. Is it enough, Chris Hayes? Oh, that's right. You are not allowed to tell the truth on MSNBC, and if you do, it's a big deal. So you have a podcast for that. That's where you talk about climate change. You don't talk about it on your fucking show because you're sponsored by the fossil fuel industry and the military-industrial complex, which are the biggest contributors. Anyway.
I'm more optimistic than you.
You are optimistic. No, I'm not. Yeah. So go, because I don't see this. Even if Bernie Sanders gets elected, they're going to either all the people don't realize that most of the Democrats in Congress are conservative, and so they will now band together with the Republicans and fight against him, and they will demonize him the way they're demonizing Tulsi Gabbard right now.
Sure.
So why are you optimistic?
Because the general awareness of what you're describing, I actually think is much higher than you get. Like, for all the Russia talk, for all the center-left talk, that's a very small percentage of the people in this country.
I agree with you that.
And so, I believe that most people understand that both political parties are hostile to America. They're not allies of America. One. Two, the number of new interesting ideas to solve for problems, whether it's in how to do preventative health care, or whether it's how to manage water, or how to manage carbon, or manage whatever the issue may be, is at an all-time high. Like, the number of ways and interesting opportunities and smart people and all those things has never been greater. The ability to trade information away from centralized channels like you're doing here and like so many others are is the highest it's ever been. And so the combination of a large-scale awareness of the problem, combined with the largest abundance of basic solutions, combined with the ability to share information, actually gives me a sense that it's 100% like this is doomed, and they know they're doomed, and it may last longer than it should, but ultimately this is a system that will be replaced.
So
by a more distributed system.
So just when it comes to energy, for instance. So they're able to produce energy now cheaper than you can by burning oil.
You're saying with non-carbon, with the renewal.
So, and then that's going to be decentralized.
Yeah. More adaptable, more resilient.
Meaning there's going to be solar panels everywhere, and then you're going to be able to sell energy back.
Every house is its own power plant.
Every house is its own power plant. And now, so it's decentralized. And one of the effects of that is that predicted $100 trillion in untapped capital will be left in the oil infrastructure. $100 trillion. Stranded assets, it's called.
Yeah.
And then that will make the housing bubble look like child's play. So moving forward with the green energy grid will actually bankrupt everybody, annihilate us. So no matter which way we go, we're fucked. And you tell me that I shouldn't be cynical?
Yeah, you should be. Things have never. Yes, the risk is the highest it has ever been. You are correct. But it's impossible for the risk to be as high as it is without opportunity being identically high. We have the biggest opportunity in the history of the world to actually influence a shift in the way all of these things happen, as a result of the fact that the risk to the world is the highest it's ever been.
I don't think I understood what you just said.
When the risk is, because we're so vulnerable, because the risk is so high, it creates an opportunity. People consider things they would never otherwise consider. They do things they would never otherwise do. And many of those things are destructive, like vote for Donald Trump or whatever it may be.
Or Brexit.
But also or Brexit or whatever. But also many of those things are super constructive.
Okay. All right. Well, I cross my fingers. I hope you're right. Before I let you go, because we've been talking for a long time, and I know you got to get to a shoe fitting. I just wanted to. The euro doesn't seem to be working out.
You mean the currency or the political?
The second thing. Well, both. I don't think it's working. It's
but the political organization that is an integrated Europe is under duress.
Yeah. Well. So what they've done is since a couple of things bad. But they created this euro, which then incentivizes people in Germany to save and lend to the poor states.
Well, Germany took over Europe with this.
Right.
situation.
So now they lend money to you to buy shit that they're creating.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they ask you to pay your credit bill, you're like, I don't get any fucking money. We're
Meanwhile,
getting the money
the
from
Southern
you.
European economies are in.
Yes.
Domestic economies are in hell because instead of having the lira or the
Right. They have the
peseta,
euro, so they can't print it themselves. So like in the United
their
States.
currency's unnecessarily high, basically, in Southern Europe.
Yes. So when they go into an economic depression, what we do in the United States is we deficit spend to get ourselves out of it. Well, now Greece can't do that
Yeah.
because they don't control their own currency.
Yeah.
How did they not see this coming, Dylan?
It wasn't the priority. In other words, the priority was to create a financial instrument that could be strong enough to allow the financing to happen across the world. In other words, it created the opportunity for a multi-$100 billion global financial market driven by the German economy and laid across the Northern European economy that was extremely valuable to the global elite and to the expense of everybody else.
Right.
Remember, you've got to separate the world. Like I remember having lived in Europe for this past winter and was in a lot of business related sort of conversations and this sort of thing. And the one thing that was made very clear to me was it's not that there are wealthy people in each of these European countries that are abusing those countries. It's that there's a group of wealthy Europeans, period, who may be French or Italian or German or whatever, but their national identity is immaterial because they're part of that global airplane class that is indifferent to the well-being of any country.
Yes.
And is basically invested in their own enrichment at all costs.
Extraction.
And is indifferent. Yeah.
Yes.
So the euro basically made extraction vastly more efficient and profitable.
And so what are they going to do?
What do they need to do?
So they're going to get one more fascist leader after another over there? Is that because that's what's happening?
Looks like it. Yeah.
And you're still optimistic.
Absolutely.
That's good.
The size of the negative is just an indication of the size of the opportunity.
Wow. Well, that
Yes, we are at the greatest risk we've ever been at. But then by definition, we have the greatest opportunity we've ever had.
So and this was all spelled out in that movie that was made probably before you were born in Network. There are no countries. There's only corporations.
Well, there's
And
the
you have
global elite, and there's everybody else.
Yeah.
And so, like, I mean, I know we've been running on time here, so I don't. But like, just like if you look at the trade policies with China, look at the trade war. And it's like, oh, China's fucking us over.
We set that up.
Well, we didn't set that. You and I didn't set that up.
No, the corporations in America set that up. We exported our labor we want Walmart set that up.
It was in the interest of the global elite.
That's right.
To basically, in the interest of Nike and Apple and all these other characters, to advance the policy with Bill Clinton to the advantage of the global elite. You think it's good for the Chinese? You want to go work at Foxconn? You think that's really good jobs in China? So that global elite is the thing that really is and I actually think that that's where you're seeing again, I mean, I'm going to be cautious. It's the obvious thing then is eat the rich, right? Like that's where the protest, it's a logical continuation of that. As long as you have a system that creates that level of reward for the people that are on that side of the ledger, no matter who's on that, the very person who's leading the protest to take down the CEO of Goldman Sachs, given the opportunity to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs, would exhibit the same abuses, which goes to the Truth and Reconciliation
Meaning with
model.
the system.
The system creates the villain. Because you were a Marine and we're in the Iraq War, doesn't mean that you're a bad person.
Right. Or Vietnam.
Or whatever. You didn't create the soldiers or not.
Right. They didn't create the policy.
The system creates. And that will be the most essential point to resolve this. Because until we're able to actually go to the Truth and Reconciliation model, which would have allowed us to get out of the financial crisis in a way that said, listen, it was our best attempt. It failed. We were going to try a different way. Go down the list. So that seems unlikely considering human nature, I must say. People like a bad guy.
Let me write something down. So I just want to ask you this. I forgot to ask you earlier. Just to make this crystal clear for people, when Barack Obama bailed out the banks, he intentionally set up a system that would not bail out Main Street. In fact, he gave lip service to it. He paid fealty to the idea of bailing out Main Street and Wall Street, but he in fact set up a system through Timothy Geithner that bailed out the banks, made them even bigger, set up a system to fund them again when this happens again, which in fact it's happening right now.
With less drama this
With
time.
less drama, because you don't have to have a vote.
Yeah.
And then the poor homeowners who were a victim of this system, instead of bailing them out, Barack Obama on purpose then kicked them out of their houses, or allowed the banks to kick them out of their houses and buy their houses at pennies on the dollar of their mortgage because they were in good neighborhoods. And so banks got a double bang. They got bailed out, plus they got your house.
And plus, you paid for then the houses to get reinflated through the...
Yes, and that was all done on the taxpayers' back, and Barack Obama gave nothing back to the taxpayers. Nothing. And
but more people got health care coverage.
And people don't know that, and so that's why when Donald Trump is running against Hillary Clinton, poor people who were fucked over in this Barack Obama, they didn't come out to vote. That the problem wasn't that Republicans came out to vote for Trump. It was that Democrats who normally voted for Democrat would no longer get off their couch to come out to vote. So they literally did do that. So why didn't Barack Obama just throw a bone to the homeowners? Why wouldn't he say, hey, look, I'm going to bail you guys out and nobody's going to miss a bonus. But I'm also going to bail out the fucking homeowners, and everybody's going to take a little bit of a haircut. We're going to write down these mortgages to where they should be, and they're going to keep them. And everybody's going to get their bonus. So why wouldn't he at least do that? He wouldn't even do that. Why would he set? So he's the one. I blame Barack Obama
Me
for
too.
Donald Trump more than anybody.
100%. That's unequivocated. There's no question about that.
And so why didn't he at least do that? Is he that?
He was a relatively young man with no experience in the financial system, brilliant man and well-educated man, but not with experience in the financial system, who came into a chaotic, most people don't understand what we're talking, most people even then didn't understand what we're talking about in terms of the dynamic of the system. He was offered an opportunity to be the first black president of the United States and be the first president to create more health care, to solve the health care problem.
Yeah.
He was told by men who are vastly more experienced with many more years on this earth that they've got the banks under control. You don't have to worry about this.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this. Whether it was Hank Paulson, whether it was Tim Geithner, whether it was Larry
Summers.
Summers, and you had the entire Clinton apparatus, which is basically an ally of the group I just described.
Yes.
And so between the Clinton apparatus and then that sort of that more senior, more seasoned, more powerful, much wealthier group of Manhattanites who fly down on the weekend on the helicopter and say, listen. And the other side of that was the leverage that the bankers and the financiers had at that moment was such that if you didn't do what they wanted, you're done. You can either do what I'm telling you and enjoy being the first black president and get your accolades for your health care, and please carry forth. It'll be lovely for you. I think they'll give you a lot of money for speeches later. Probably sell some books.
You probably have $80 million in the bank when you leave the
this
president.
is going to go quite nicely for you. So if you just relax.
Yes.
Or you can get involved in some philosophical, principled nonsense about banks and houses and money, which you don't really know anyway. And in the process, you'll find yourself completely finished, because if you do that, our capacity, it's like a mutually assured destruction. Like, in other words, if you mess with us, there will be no mortgage, there'll be no car loans, there will be no money in the ATMs, and everybody will blame you, not us.
Right.
So you can either be the most celebrated president in the history of the world, or most reviled.
And so what was he supposed to do? So wasn't he supposed to open up a state bank?
No, what the logical answer, I wrote this at the time. I remember writing this in 2008 for Carl Icahn, who had a blog at the time. Carl was like, this is logical. The logical solution when you have all those failed banks is, one, you nationalize all the banks immediately.
And so tell people what that means.
It means that the banks are now owned by the government in receivership temporarily.
Right.
Right? It's like a bankruptcy type of a situation,
Right.
but instead of it being in the hands of the court, it's in the one. All of the equity and all of the debt, meaning the stock price and the debt price, goes to zero. You've made the company worthless.
Right.
So now that stock is worth zero. They did it to Bear Stearns.
Yep.
Took it to $2. But they don't want to do that to everything. And even though everything's worthless, I'm going to pretend it's just Bear Stearns. So you nationalize the banks, you kill the equity and the debt, you fire the management, you hire new management.
Yes.
You issue new equity, you issue new debt, and you form new banks that then become private entities. And those new banks are restricted in how big they can be, not necessarily by any given number of metrics, but by the size of the leverage, the size of the deposits. I mean, literally, I feel like you could do you could reform the entire financial system in like a paragraph. And instead, Dodd-Frank is like thousands of pages. And that paragraph would just say retained risk. I wouldn't even be, I guess that's 2 words, actually. Retained risk.
And so you're saying Barack Obama was if he would have tried to do something, they would have.
I would argue anybody in Barack Obama's situation would have had to do the same thing. The leverage that the bankers had. Even though it's easy for you and I to look morally and be like, oh, Barack Obama stinks and what a loser. And going to the Truth and Reconciliation structure, there is not that's the thing. It would take an orator, which Barack Obama was, who would be able to go into the public theater and explain to the world.
Yes.
Here's what's happening.
Yes.
We need to take these banks, we need to nationalize them, we need to create new banks that are smaller.
Right.
If I do that right now, the existing banks are going to obliterate everybody's mortgage and everybody's and blame it on me.
Right.
Or whoever the president is. And I mean, so that would be the only theoretical way to navigate that, which was Teddy Roosevelt's act and all the, not act, but effect.
So like,
that would be the only way. That was why I was carrying on about it.
I mean, but why? So I understand there's powerful factions who have power over politicians like Wall Street. I get that. But aren't there also people like, for instance, you just mentioned Carl Icahn, who thought that what you were promoting made more sense. So aren't there people
but no, that was the thing that was so amazing. And I don't want to I'm not going to put a bunch of words in Carl Icahn's mouth, but there are a string of those human beings who I was very consistent in my contact with, they were the ones that how do you think I found out that this was the biggest theft and cover up in the history of the world?
Right.
It was in a private lunch in the executive dining room at Lazard Frere with Bruce Wasserstein, who was a CEO of Lazard at the time. And
what is Lazard?
Lazard is one of the it's a big investment bank.
Okay.
And I said, Bruce, what's going on? And he said, biggest theft and cover up in the history of the world. I said, what do you mean? And he said, the bank CEO's job, a bank board's job, is he's like the single biggest job, and he's like is to the bank CEO and the bank board decides the amount of risk that the bank takes. So you may want to take a lot of risk with your European, whatever your little strategy is, and I may want to take a lot of risk with my Japanese strategy, but ultimately the throttling of the total amount of risk that the bank can take, the total number of loans we can issue, the total amount of speculation we can have, is a decision made by the CEO. And when the liability for failure for risk taken, and so normally you manage risk by saying, if I risk too much, I'm going to lose everything, and that would be bad. I'll have less fun. It'll be not fun.
Right.
Be bad. Kids won't go to school, whatever. The system was flipped in such a way where the more risk I took, the more money I made, and the consequences of that risk didn't reside with me. I pressed them through the too big to fail apparatus into the tax system, which now instead of saying retained risk, where I'm responsible for what happens, now it's actually transferred risk, which is the more, like if you send me to Vegas with your money, I'm going to bet every hand.
Right.
And that's what we created in the financial system.
So because of the repeal of
Glass-Steagall, all those, the combination of 10 different.
So now when a bank overextends themselves, and so they're supposed to be what they call moral hazard, right? So,
Yep.
like, if I make a bet and I lose, I'm supposed to feel the pain of that. They don't feel the pain because now the government just comes in and bails them out and
pull
makes
your
them whole.
losers off,
So-
and you keep your winners.
So they keep doing that, right? So that's the big. So that's going to happen. So is that going to happen again? And how soon do you think this is all going to come down? Because it's coming down again, except they've got a
It
mechanism.
doesn't matter, because the beautiful thing about Dodd-Frank, the primary purpose of Dodd-Frank was not to create a change in the incentive, to create investment, to create value, to do anything meaningful in the financial system. The primary purpose of Dodd-Frank was to ensure that the next time there's a hiccup in the default rate, like there was in 2006 and 7, that it can be mitigated very efficiently and quietly without any public disclosure or disruption.
And that's happening right now.
Yeah.
So there actually is another kind of. The system is.
The taxpayers are funding the financial system right now, but the financial system is not showing big cracks because the renovation to the system after the financial crisis is working.
And here's what you're talking about. So this is from September. It says for a second day, the New York Fed spent billions to calm the financial market. So I just want to let people know how much. Oh, there it is. I want to let people know how much they're really bailing out. So in 2 days, they pumped $128 billion into the United States banking system. And nobody's talking about it. It's not. There's no town halls. Anderson Cooper isn't rolling up his sleeves or putting on a T-shirt to talk about it. Nope, not just like that. And I'm going to tell you how much $128 billion is. You can send everyone to the United States to college for $65 billion a year. So you can send everybody to college for free. And so now we still got, 30, 50 billion left over? Or 60? You can end homelessness in the United States for $20 billion. You can end homelessness, send everybody to college, and we're still going to have roughly $40 to $50 billion left over. That's how much money this is. And they just printed it, just like Stephanie Kelton says. They just printed it. Nobody asked, hey, where are you going to raise a tax to pay for this? They're not raising that. They just couple of numbers on a keyboard, and you got that money. Which tells you that they can end homelessness tomorrow if they wanted. They could send everybody to college, and they could give everybody health care if they wanted. They don't want to. They're not your friend. And the problem is right now, we have Donald Trump who's telling people that it's the media who's the enemy, which they are. And unfortunately, that's also what totalitarian leaders say about the media. So even though Donald Trump is maybe telling the truth, it's probably falling on deaf ears because he's the one saying it. So I love how they say it, by the way. This shows that there's a crack emerged in the system. So if they didn't, what he's talking about when they passed Dodd-Frank, they made it so we never have to have a TARP again. So remember that? They had to vote. Should we bail out the bank? Should we not? They got rid of that vote. And so now this happens automatically. This happens automatically, and it's happening automatically. And no one's talking about it. So it just goes to show you, Stephanie Kelton was 100% right, that they could solve any problem with money that they feel like, because they don't ever have to raise taxes to do it.
Until the currency collapses.
Until the currency collapses, which is going to come because if everything goes right with the Green New Deal, there will no longer be a need for the petrodollar, which is what's artificially propping up the United States dollar. And once our dollar is no longer the reserve currency, again, it's also... So should I still keep putting money into a 401k?
Sure. Well, I mean, you're saying, should you be buying equity?
Should I buy a house? Should I buy land in Utah with water rights? Or what the fuck? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
But you're saying this in the context of mitigating a currency collapse, or you're looking for
Yes.
The thing when a currency collapses,
My 401k is worthless then.
no, as long as because what happens is like the value of your house. Let's say this is a $100 house, just for purposes of conversation, and then the currency collapses by 50%. Then this is now a $200 house.
Oh,
Let's say
really?
you've got a $50 stock you have $50 worth of.
But if nobody can
IBM.
buy it, but if nobody has the money to buy it, then it's almost worthless, right? So it basically is still worthless.
Well, I mean,
So like if I have a 401k, but I can't cash it in because the companies and nobody wants to buy it, it's worthless.
Right. Well, there's two different things. One is, what is the value of assets, and the value of non-cash assets, right? If you just have $100 and the currency collapses, now it's half as valuable, right? But if you have $100 worth of house, then the house is going to double in value in order to offset the fact, because it's not denominated in cash, it's just a value property. I don't care how many, if the dollar loses half its value, then I'm going to need twice as many dollars, right? Like, because this thing is a house, it's not dollars.
Right.
So that issue is that's naturally self-correcting. What you're talking about is the large-scale economic catastrophe that would ripple throughout the earth as a result of the collapse of the dollar, which the world is incentivized to prevent at all costs, with the exception perhaps of China. Who is the number one entity working to displace the dollar as the sort of currency of choice. I mean, there's a great number. I might have mentioned this when I was with you on Sunday night. Something 65% of all global commerce happens in U.S. dollars.
Yes.
Even between countries who are, it's Belgium to Brazil, but they're trading in dollars.
Right. So if they sell chocolate to Brazil, Brazil's going to give them dollars for the chocolate.
Dollar-denominated transaction. And that is the single greatest asset that America has.
And so when people buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they first convert their currency into dollars, and then
because the currency of oil trading is dollar denominated.
Yes, and then Saudi Arabia takes a lot of that money and buys our T-bills, right? Yes. That's what so that also keeps us propped up, which is why Barack Obama had to take a flight to Saudi Arabia when the Congress passed a law making it okay for 9/11 victims to sue Saudi Arabia, and he had to fly there and say, "Don't worry, it's not going to happen."
Right. Yeah,
because they could pull.
The reason we've been pandering to Saudi Arabia ever since World War II, when everybody sort of lined up around who their friend in the Middle East was going to be, is the single great. I mean, for the Saudis to stop pricing oil in dollars is the single greatest. It's arguably an act of war, and it's a single greatest. It's the most catastrophic economic thing that could occur.
So I don't think a war with Iran will happen. Do you?
I agree with that. No.
Okay, good. Because if it did, I think first off, it would be World War III.
Of course. Yeah. Nobody wants. There's not going to be a war with Iran.
So why do they keep pretending like they're going to do one?
Who?
Like John Bolton and Pompeo. Why do they CIA keep staging fake?
Great politics. It's good conservative politics for engagement, and good for weapon sales.
Yeah, it is good for weapon sales. Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of reason.
Okay. All right. Well, Dylan Ratigan, I can't think of I'm sure there's more questions. I could talk to you forever, but I think we talked.
Seems like we've talked a lot.
How long have we talked, Steph?
Over an hour and a half.
Oh, okay. So not that long.
No.
It's all right.
Almost 2 hours.
All right. We didn't do
That's pretty long.
We didn't do a 3-hour Edward Snowden, but we did 2 hours. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. You want to go another hour just on principle?
I think so. Just to show that I still got it.
Yeah.
I still got it, and that I'm back. I'm stronger than ever.
Because we still haven't covered most of the things.
I know.
Ironically.
What do you? What's the biggest thing we haven't covered?
Biggest thing we haven't covered?
So, I mean, here's why I'm cynical. Just let me tell you why I'm cynical.
Okay.
Things aren't going to change until people put on yellow vests and shut capitalism down. That's not going to happen in the United States because people don't have health care and they can't take off work to go protest until enough people become unemployed. And even if Bernie Sanders somehow magically overcomes all the cheating and becomes president, like I said before,
he'll still be utterly ineffective.
The media will still be against him like they are today.
But I would say that's because you're looking to the government. In other words, the expectation is as long as we're looking to the federal government to solve it,
right,
it's not going to happen.
And I don't think people are. For some reason, Americans aren't like France. They have health care. France has free college. They have dental in France, and they have a great retirement system, and they're still in the streets. We don't have any of that shit.
The French know that as soon as somebody bumps the meters, you go out in the streets.
Yeah.
Right, like they just know for that.
Yes.
It's like the opposite of remember the Rudy Giuliani broken windows.
Yes, it's the opposite.
He's like as soon as they do any encroachment anywhere, we're in.
Yes. that broken window theory.
Yeah.
And so the people of France feel that way about the government. As soon as they F with us, we immediately get in the street. So we don't have that culture in the United
At
States.
all.
In fact, in the United States, they're like, people are like, oh, why are they protesting? I'm going to be late for work. You know, that's the whole point. If you protest in your apartment, that's not a protest. That's a party.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So the point of protest is to disrupt.
Yes.
You have to, and so we're not a nation of disruptors anymore. We're a nation of people who want to have a gun to guard their own house.
Which really, that's a whole, that you want to talk about something we haven't talked about. That's a whole nother conversation, which really is driven by, I believe, the situation, the wounded, there's our relationship with masculinity and security in this country is an unadulterated disaster.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the gun has become a proxy for a sense of security.
Yes.
And it has really nothing to do with guns or risk or anything like this. It has to do with the gaping hole, the gaping spiritual hole in men specifically, that revolves around a sense of insecurity that has then manifest as this really cancerous dynamic around feeling the need to have guns as a mechanism of sort of dealing with that. But again, we fight about guns, but we're not talking about how we deal with our young men as a culture. And I don't mean deal with our young men in the sense of like in enrolling that, in celebrating young masculinity in a way that is healthy and non-destructive and is not simply either a sporting event that is sort of an exploitation of it on some level. Although again, I think that sports are actually a great release for a lot of that energy. But the point is that there are other cultures throughout the history of the world that have done much more interesting and creative things with young male energy and with masculine energy in general that allows it to flow to healthier or constructive utilizations, as opposed to this sort of rot that has occurred that then creates all both the abusive behavior and the oddball gun demand.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, but if you've ever shot an AR-15, you know, I forget I'm impotent.
Yeah,
and I have a heart on.
I know.
Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Is there anything else?
No, I'm good right now. I would like to come back. That's my only request. I'd be happy to return.
I would love to have you back, and I'm sure I'll have more videos of your past to play.
Thank God.
How is your hair getting thicker?
I know it's turning gray.
Do you use like a product? What kind of product do you use?
No. I'm a pretty limited product human.
Really?
Very, very low product.
So you've had the same hair for the last 10 years. It hasn't moved.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I bring this up is because I'm hyper focused on my hair.
Why, you feel like it's going?
Oh, it's going. It doesn't. This is it. It's really thin. I'm almost bald. I've maintained a hairline, and then I spray all this shit to make it look like I have hair. And that's why I'm all. Whenever I watch TV, the first thing I'm thinking of, I wonder if that's how far my hair will go. How far will my hair? Will it be that bad? That's all.
My hairline moved when I was 19.
And then it stayed?
Sort of post-pubescent adjustment to the widow's peak that I have to this day. And that's it.
That's it.
That's it. I mean, it's changed color.
Yeah. But you didn't get the shitty, that blue gray, you know, that people get that.
No, it's a nice color, right?
Yeah, it's good. It's like that bright
white
gray, whatever. It's good. Yeah. And people get that blue gray, and they put it into a beard. Like, what the? Hey, why do you think David? I know this has nothing to do with anything. Why do you think David Letterman gets away with that?
With that beard?
That stupid beard. It's like, to me, that's the equivalent of, and I've told you, that's the equivalent of Michael Jackson being so rich and having no regular people around him on a daily basis that his best friend becomes a monkey. And that's the exact thing. So David Letterman has nobody to go, what the fuck is wrong with you, you jackass? Mm-hmm. He got nobody in his life like that.
That's right. You just answered your own question.
That's it.
That's obviously it.
And nobody else makes fun of him for it.
They don't even when they sit on that Netflix show, they're not like, "What's with the beard?"
What's
Dave?
with the beard, jackass?
Come on, Dave. We all love you, but what's with the beard?
Dave, are you? I can't wait till you get stuck coming down a chimney. What are you doing?
What are you doing, man?
Yeah, what is this in aid of? You know, I don't get. You know, Conan O'Brien did the same thing when he got fired from the Tonight Show.
He went beard.
He grew this big beard as
protest beard.
They're not paying me $5 million to do a mediocre show anymore. I'm going to grow a beard. It's only fucking.
It's like self-immolation as protest.
It's like, why don't you? They're just like human cul-de-sacs.
Yeah.
Like that's what they are. They're completely taken away from real life. They live in the suburb of humanity. They have no idea what's really happening to people, and they lament losing a network TV show they never deserved in the first fucking place.
There's nothing like a victim narrative for
For a millionaire,
Yeah.
no,
It's very suitable.
Anyway, and then David Letterman, who did one of the most groundbreaking shows,
My money, he was the greatest.
Yeah, he was
at his best, he was the greatest.
right. And then he became, the poster child for why you should retire when you're on top.
Yeah.
I mean, honest to God, they could have those last couple
Those
of
last
years of
5 years or
him doing
whatever,
the
10
show, they
years.
could have stabbed him in the thigh with an ice pick, and he wouldn't even have flinched. He was
Yeah.
not there.
Yeah.
He was not. He was phoning it in like nobody's.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just doing this to keep up with Leno, I guess. Like, what are you fucking doing this for?
Like, clear out, bro.
Go. It's over. You're obviously not doing.
And you've already are a mirror-made man. We all saw it. That stuff you did was amazing. Thank you.
Okay.
Isn't it too bad that late night's gone? I mean, I know they still produce shows that are late night shows, but late night shows are not late night shows. It's all garbage, as they would say.
Well, I never.
But like Johnny Carson was like a thing.
Yes.
He was the greatest. Even if you didn't like it, was just like it was a real thing. David Letterman was a real thing.
It was a happening. The Tonight Show when Johnny Carson
Yeah.
hosted it was a happening, and
Yes.
there was always the potential of something happening on that show that wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
And you wanted to see, are they going to drink? Or maybe somebody's
knows?
going to swear or tell the truth about what's actually happening in Hollywood, or something was.
So much.
There was a sense of danger that could happen at any moment, right? That is complete. So It's like, hey, do you want to? Well, when people ask me, hey, do you want to see what a show would look like if it was produced by a huge corporation financed by the military-industrial complex, and they interview other celebrities? Well, that's what late-night television
I
is.
blame Lorne Michaels.
There's no point to. Why do you blame him?
Because he took over all the time slots.
Okay.
Like, in other words, Lorne Michaels in his negotiation, as he had so much power because of the success at SNL, said, I want to control other time slots. And so he took, so when Letterman left and all that, Lorne Michaels took the late night time slots and just used it as an additional development venue for SNL talent. Thus, Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers, both fine individuals, but it's a pale indication.
Again, both fine individuals. There's no reason for their shows.
Exactly.
So, like, I was just making fun of Conan O'Brien, who I like to make fun of the most.
Okay.
He started a podcast, right? You know why? Because his show was off the air for 2 solid months last year, and nobody fucking noticed. And then they brought it back, and now he only does a 22-minute show a night. 22 minutes, 8 minutes of commercials, 22 minutes of Conan. Nobody noticed. And so now he's doing a podcast. Why would you need to do a Same thing. It's just like, because can you imagine the level of conversation on Conan O'Brien's show has reached, on all of them, such vacuous bullshit. Empty, nothing. And could you imagine someone downloading Conan O'Brien's TBS show to listen to as a podcast? Fucking no one. And so now they're like, well, why don't we go make an interesting show that people would actually want to listen to with interesting ideas? Let's try to do it. I guess we have to do it on a podcast. Because that's what. So why
And think of that to the relevance of Johnny Carson at his prime.
Right? Think of that to the Johnny Carson. There was no
The
bigger
vacuous bullshit versus Johnny Carson in his prime.
And they're all that. I mean, I can't. It's Stephen Colbert. There's no point to watch their show. It's establishment claptrap. And the Stephen Colbert is Shakespearean in his fall, from doing the best political comedy show in the history of the world to doing another empty, vacuous, bullshit establishment mouthpiece late night talk show. By the way, why are they even on at night? Nobody watches them in real fucking time. I know. Again, it's like a clip gets passed around.
Exactly.
You can do that at any time.
It really is just a production studio for a clip.
For a clip. That's all it is, right?
But that's all. Half of these TV shows.
So
even when I was doing the show at MSNBC 5 or whatever is 9-10 years ago, half of that whole thing is just an overpriced production studio for a clip.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not putting. You're still playing clips.
Yes. Right. So there was this guy Ismo who was this. I forget. He's from a foreign country and he has an accent. He's a hilarious comedian. And I saw him at the Comedy Magic Club. I'm like, that guy's really funny. He has all these insights into America that we don't, because we're from here. He sees it. He got us a 5-minute spot on Conan when they still used to have comedians on and they were doing an hour. And then that clip went up on Facebook and it got like 50 million views on something like that. So now he sells out theaters now.
Okay.
And they're like, oh, see, Conan. I'm like, no. That was Facebook did that because he was on Conan. Nobody saw it.
Right.
It was until it went on Facebook and got passed around, which means that clip could have came from a comedy club.
Or this
it could have came
room.
from Jimmy Kimmel. Could have came from this room. Could have came from anywhere. It was on Facebook and it got passed around. So it had nothing to do with Conan O'Brien. So I just
the last thing on Johnny Carson, I mean, is that it takes away the. There was an apolitical, there was a non-political, like Johnny Carson was an icon of American culture. He wasn't an axe to grind on American politics.
Right.
And he was like the cool guy who was friends with all the coolest people, but was also your friend.
Yeah.
Like you weren't going to get to be friends with all those people, but he was your friend and he was friends with all those people. And he was letting you in on that in a way that, which is just an incredible gift. It was an incredible gift.
Yes.
And,
and now that's all.
Gone.
It's all. Yeah. All right. Well.
But now we're just complaining old men.
Now we are.
Now
I
we're-
know. The kids today with their late night shows and the long hair. What's wrong with them?
Exactly. No one. We're not going to win on that one.
All right, Dylan Ratigan. Look forward to your return visit to the show. Thanks for being here. It's been fantastic. And now, are you doing anything you want people to know about?
Not right now.
Okay. No more Tasty Trade?
I do. That Tasty Trade I learned a lot with that.
What did
That's a whole
you
other
learn from Tasty Trade? What was Tasty Trade anyway?
So Tasty Trade is like an
Do
option.
they make ice cream? That's what it sounds like.
It doesn't it?
It's like I'm going to go like a Tasty Freeze.
I know.
Yeah.
Or Tasty Delight, as they're the frozen yogurt people.
It should come on a cone, whatever Tasty makes.
If it's tasty, it has to be. If it doesn't come with a cone, it's not tasty, by definition.
So how did...
But so those guys, Tom Sosnoff specifically, understands that human nature is such that the perception of future risk is always higher than it actually is. Your mother is more worried you're going to have a car accident driving to work than the actual probability you're going to have a car accident driving to work. I could give a billion examples. That's a human nature. Human fear of the future tends to be worse than the actual risk that exists in the future.
Story of my life.
Everybody's life.
Okay.
That phenomenon plays out in the financial markets where options on anything are overpriced always. Because the pricing, the today's perception of tomorrow's risk is always too much. And so Tom's whole premise was you need to teach people how to sell that. Sell people. You don't want to be a buyer of insurance because insurance is overpriced. You want to be a seller of insurance. And this is an insurance in the stock market. But that was the principle. And I did, because philosophically I agreed with him. And I was like, okay, this is the only place in the world where mathematically Jimmy Dore's present fear of his risk tomorrow is being manifest, and you can actually understand it and look at it. And that to me was interesting. It also gave me a good steady paycheck while I was building Helical, which is a solar-powered hydroponic farming system. So it gave me a way to do something that was interesting for me to learn about and from a perspective that I appreciated while still really doing the work that was necessary to build out Helical, which is the solar-powered hydroponic farming business that we built.
That's what I wanted to talk. Why didn't we talk about the hydroponic farm? First of all, I didn't understand what you said about Tasty Trade. But second of all, about selling insurance instead of buying insurance?
Yeah.
What do you mean? I don't know what that means.
An option.
So Tasty Trade's, they're big
They're
overarching...
teaching people that instead of buying options, you should sell options. But no one even knows what an option is. And so we really shouldn't continue.
Right.
Because it's going to become, we could do it another time.
Yeah, okay.
And it could be done. But now's not the time. But I enjoyed it, and it helped with the helical stuff. I mean, listen, there's 1,000 of it. We can talk about, there's a software. Why don't we leave it where we are?
Okay, and then we'll come back and
then we
tackle
can
that
do it another
stuff.
time
All
with
right,
another thing.
But we had to get this out of the way. All right, Dylan Ratigan.
Tulsi Gabbard. I love Tulsi Gabbard.
You do?
Yeah, I do.
What do you... I mean...
I like her. I like her courage.
Mm-hmm.
I respect her courage.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very attractive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you know why she keeps the gray streak in her hair? Did you know this? I
I
just
don't
found
know
this
why.
out.
No.
She
Is it like a warrior princess thing?
she started when she went to Iraq. That started growing.
Okay.
That gray
It
thing.
emerged from the top of her head.
And so she decided to keep it as a reminder of what she went through in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, that was one of those things. She joined the military. She thought she was going to fight terrorists who bombed us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what she thought. Mm-hmm. And then she gets there and she's a medic and she sees all the, the deal.
I do.
So, but you also like Andrew Yang,
Yeah,
right?
I do.
Now, I like Andrew Yang as a person.
I do.
Because he seems very sincere in wanting to move the country forward.
And he's having so much fun.
And he seems to be having a good time doing it. And he's opening people's minds to think differently. Even though I might not agree with his proposals, he's making you break out of a box.
That's the reason I like Andrew Yang as much as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do with people like, universal basic income, which is obviously his sort of like big.
You're right.
It's because I believe Andrew Yang relates to the world. And I believe everybody running for president should at least be at Andrew Yang's level of basic understanding of like how to think.
Right.
And then you can disagree about
Right.
whether you've this, the healthcare, this, tax policy, that, technological displacement, whatever it is. So Andrew Yang's appealing to me for that reason.
Right. Me too. Me
Yeah.
too. And that he's not willing to he's not afraid to have a big idea.
Yeah.
Right.
And just not afraid to expect people to understand and relate in a way. And I think he's pretty effective at retailing that.
Very. Certainly helps that he's Asian.
Well, I'm racist
Yeah.
insofar because I had a Taiwanese. That's a clip that'll get pulled out and used against me, by the way. I had a Taiwanese producer when I was at Bloomberg, or I had a producer when I was at Bloomberg who was from Taiwan, and he was one of the greatest people that I've ever worked with. I really liked him, and so I have an inappropriate affection and respect for people of Taiwanese descent.
Oh, okay.
So I'm like pro Taiwanese people.
Oh, okay.
And so, like, if we can get it, and I feel like since China's going to win in the end,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be interesting to send him a Taiwanese president of the United States? That's a curveball. Who are we negotiating with? What?
Yeah. Anyway. Well, I love this. And that's the thing that people don't realize. Jack Ma laid it out, he's the Jeff Bezos of Asia. And he said, the problem with the United States is you don't distribute your money correctly. He says you've spent $15 trillion over the last 20 years in the military on bombs when that could have been put into your people and you'd have a totally different country.
Transportation system. I mean, we can run lists.
And so that's what Tulsi's basically her message is.
Of course.
And of course they're going to squash that. That's why they immediately red bait her and call her Russian.
Amazing.
And yeah. And it's quite amazing to watch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole conspiracy. I mean, now we're into the land of some conspiracy theory, although who knows that this entire, whether it's the impeachment with Biden or whatever, all of this is a Hillary Clinton orchestrated positioning
So do you
to
think
re-enter.
So the theory is that, hey, let's impeach him on
We'll do the
Ukraine,
impeachment on
which will
Biden.
also take Biden down,
Bingo.
and then Hillary can
Clear them both, and then Hillary's back. Because the list of theoretically impeachable offenses from Donald Trump is vastly longer than this foolishness of like
Of
Biden,
Ukraine.
What are you talking about?
No,
like this guy is out of control. I mean, he's like running his daughter made $80 million last year on the
Yes.
side. Like the hotels,
The
he's
Saudi
pumping
Arabians,
money.
they put too much
he's
money.
over there putting his hands on the orb. He's doing all this stuff, man. And that's all good. But now you're saying the fact that he's kicking it around with the Ukrainians on the and that's the thing. So that's that's an interesting dynamic. And one other thing on foreign influence. The obvious one is the U.S. has been doing foreign influence forever. Who are we kidding, right? But this is a country, the United States of America, built on foreign influence. Like the American Revolution was not won by a bunch of ragtag farmers led by George Washington. The American Revolution was won by the French and the Germans who were looking to kneecap England and provided the Navy and the soldiers to support the ragtag group of farmers to ensure they would beat England. But when we tell the story of the American Revolution, we don't say, man, it's a good thing the French naval forces came out and shut down the Atlantic Ocean to make sure it was very difficult for England to really engage. And it's a good thing the Germans sent the Hessians to support the soldiers to create a more robust ground military that could function. I mean, this is a country predicated. So really all the American Revolution was a power play between the Europeans. And when there was an opportunity, it's no different than America funding who would pick your resistance movement and pick your country to overthrow an unappealing dictator. When the Americans lit up in the 1700s against the British, or were even receptive to be lit up against it, who were the first people to help? The French and the Germans. I'm not sure where that really gets us relative to Ukraine, but my point is, this is just how the world works.
Yeah, there's been foreign meddling in American politics since the beginning of our country.
There would be no country. We would still be a British colony.
Without foreign meddling. And people also forget that Benjamin Netanyahu addressed Congress against Barack Obama's. I mean, it's just crazy. You want to talk about foreign meddling in our elections. It's Israel by far is the winner. And even Nate Silver, who is my favorite Disney employee, Nate Silver even admitted in a moment of clarity that of the 100 things that influenced the 2016 election, Russia would not crack the top 100.
Of course. I think number one is choosing the most unappealing candidate in American presidential politics.
And so when you see ubiquitous in the news media, ubiquitous from PBS to NPR to CNN, New York Times, Washington Post to YouTube progressives who ubiquitously push an obvious bullshit conspiracy theory with no evidence, I'll tell you what it does to me. It makes me become cynical and not ever want to be part of that club ever. And what does it do to you?
I don't think it makes me want to go stand up paddleboarding in California.
Okay, I wish I could do that. I'm afraid.
I'll take you out.
I'm afraid of sharks. I'm afraid of sharks. I'm just afraid of sharks. I'm afraid of jellyfish. I'm afraid of anything.
There's no sharks.
You ever been stung by a jellyfish?
Sure.
Ah, see?
But not here as a child on Long Island.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's why I stay out of the ocean no matter where it is. I jumped in in Italy off the Capri or whatever, or
lovely.
Capri.
Quite nice.
Because I'm like, I can't. My wife, I don't want her to hold it over my head the rest of my life. So I jumped in.
And what happened?
I got bit by a shark. And
every time.
And then anyway, no, nothing happened. I jumped in, it was beautiful, and I got out right away.
I've done a really good job of not consuming the content
of the news.
I don't watch cable news. I don't watch television news as a rule.
Mm-mm. You can see why most people. I walk in. My comedian. I go to comedy clubs, so I interact with regular people all the time, right? And when I was saying all this stuff about how the DNC wasn't hacked by Russia, Trump's not in bed with Putin, blah, 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 but people look at me like I was nuts, right? Mm-hmm. And then when I predicted what would be in the Mueller report, and then it actually turned out that way, they were like, how the hell did you know that? I'm like, because this is WMDs all over again, baby. It's right there. And now everybody, and so, I don't even know how I got started on this. But anyway, we got to wrap it up.
Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Donald Trump.
Oh, that's right.
Get ready.
Get ready. She's getting in. She's getting in. Mark Penn predicted it last year in November. He said, don't believe that. He said she might even wait till after Iowa. But she is getting in. And Mark Penn, one of her closest advisors for her whole life.
Going back to get what's rightfully hers.
So here's a crazy joke theory.
Please.
The crazy joke theory is from Steph. She says that Elizabeth Warren picks Hillary Clinton as her vice president, and then of course Elizabeth Warren has an accident.
Sure, that's a good plan. I like that strategy.
Anyway, hey, were you besides the rest of the world, were you also able to predict Jeffrey Epstein's suicide? Because we did.
That one seemed like pretty predictable.
And isn't it amazing how it just went away from the news? There's no investigation. How did this happen? What? Just boop, boop. Too many powerful people would be exposed in that. And
I mean, in that one, I actually believe Jeffrey Epstein was dead before he got off of that airplane from Paris.
yeah.
Like I mean, obviously, I don't know any. This is my own conjecture, but my belief is, whenever the decision was made that this guy's got to go, finally, that decision was made before he even got on that airplane in Paris. And when they picked him up coming home from Paris that night in New York in July, and they put him in, he was never coming out.
Right.
Like he was done as soon as they put him in the car on the tarmac.
He had to know.
That he was done.
Yes.
I would think so. Yeah.
He had to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's a whole other bigger
That is.
conversation. We could have a whole Epstein thesis.
Well, if you start to go into the weeds with Epstein, it is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have the time to do. Other people
Yeah.
have done it.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's yes.
Okay, we'll have you back. Dylan Ratigan, everybody. Next live Jimmy Dore show is in Philadelphia, November 18th. Plus, we'll be in Honolulu on December 27th doing live shows all month long in November and December in Hollywood at the Sycamore Tavern. Plus, we're going to be in San Jose, Sacramento, Tempe, Portland. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all of our live shows. And please become a patron if you like the show. We give you hours of bonus material every week. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com and become a premium member. Thanks for your support.